Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight's gentle journey is one that might tug at the edges of imagination a little more than usual. It's a question that sounds almost like science fiction, but it carries traces of myth, history and geology alike. What if Earth has already been reset? What if everything we know, everything we build our lives upon, isn't the first version of this story? Maybe we are not standing at the beginning of progress, but living on the pages of a sequel, with whole volumes erased before us. Before we step into that thought, let me ask something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're winding down under a blanket. Maybe you're slipping earbuds in while staring at the ceiling. Maybe you're drifting in a quiet room with a cup of tea by your side. Wherever you are, and whatever time your clock reads, you've arrived at this moment with me. And if you find these quiet explorations a soothing way to rest, or a gentle way to drift into thought, I'd be grateful if you tapped the like button and perhaps subscribed. That little action helps this calm corner reach others who might also need a pause in their day. Now, let's begin. The idea of the world being reset isn't new. You can find hints of it in every culture's stories, in the ruins half buried by time, and even in the patterns etched into the rocks beneath our feet. We're used to thinking of Earth as a continuous line of history. One event leads to another, and here we are at the modern age, carrying the accumulated weight of every century before us. But imagine for a moment that history isn't a neat chain, but a cycle. Imagine that long before the pyramids, long before writing, long before anything we can easily trace, there were other rises and other falls. Civilizations that might have walked across the same valleys we walk, left their marks on the same cliffs, breathed the same air. Maybe they were wiped away not by wars alone but by disasters so complete that even memory crumbled. It can sound strange, maybe even impossible, but when you look at the world carefully, there are places where the evidence almost whispers. Myths of floods that cover the earth, fires that consume whole ages, storms that reset the balance. Nearly every culture has some version of a great catastrophe that wipes the slate clean. Scientists often explain these as symbolic tales to make sense of natural disasters, but what if they were fragments of memories? Memories stretched thin across generations until they became stories, then legends, then myths. Consider how fragile our own world would be if reset today. Imagine if, overnight, electricity vanished, satellites fell silent, and our networks went dark. Within weeks, much of what defines modern life would vanish. Within decades, skyscrapers would crumble, highways would crack and be swallowed by weeds, and the great hum of cities would fade into forests and rivers again. Thousands of years later, what would remain? A few scattered ruins, some puzzling traces of metal and concrete, and perhaps myths told by survivors. To a future humanity, how advanced would we look? Would they know we had space stations, particle accelerators, and an internet that wrapped the planet? Or would we become a half-remembered whisper, a rumour of a civilization lost to time? This is where the thought becomes heavier. Because Earth has already shown us it can wipe the slate clean. Entire species that once ruled the planet are gone. Dinosaurs, for example, thrived for over 150 million years, far longer than humans have existed. They were diverse, successful, and spread across every continent. Then a rock from space, just one impact, reset the board. Nearly everything collapsed. And what was left was forced to evolve into something entirely different. If nature can erase such a dominant lineage, could it not also erase one of our own kind, long before our recorded history? There are sites that make us wonder. Pyramids older than we thought possible, stone structures that defy easy explanation, artifacts out of place in time. Most of them can be explained with patience and archaeology. But not all questions go away, some remain like loose threads. If humans disappeared tomorrow, how much of our world would survive 50,000 years of wind, rain, earthquakes and ice? And if very little survived, What kind of puzzle would that leave for whoever came after us? This is where the idea of a reset isn't just a fantasy. Earth itself resets constantly. Ice ages sweep across continents, erasing entire ecosystems. Supervolcanoes blanket skies with ash, cooling climates and collapsing food chains. Ocean currents shift, tipping the balance of weather for centuries. Asteroids hit with the force of millions of nuclear bombs. To live on Earth is to live on a stage that occasionally sweeps away its set and begins again with new players. The reset doesn't need to be absolute. It doesn't have to erase everything down to the last trace. It can be partial, enough to scatter survivors, enough to push memory into the fog, enough to force a species back into survival mode until stories are the only inheritance. Then, slowly, the building begins again. Villages rise, tools sharpen, agriculture spreads, and history begins once more as though from nothing. We assume this is the first time, but maybe it's only the latest. Even science entertains versions of this thought, though in different terms. The idea of cyclical Earth systems, the great extinction events, the periodic reshaping of climates and continents. In deep time, the record shows at least 5 mass extinctions, each one erasing most of life, each one followed by a new bloom, as though Earth reset the board and let the game play again. These are resets on a biological scale, but could they not also reset cultural, social, and even technological growth? If that feels far-fetched, pause for a moment and imagine a flood. Not just a local river overflowing, but a global event triggered by melting ice caps or shifting oceans. In our cities, almost every major population hub lies on coasts. A sudden rise in sea level, a mega tsunami, or even a series of cascading earthquakes could sweep them away. The survivors scattered inland might tell their children stories of a time when great cities touched the skies. A few generations later, those stories would sound like fantasy. 1,000 years later, they might be remembered as legends of a golden age, or perhaps even dismissed as impossible. The cycle begins again. So when ancient stories speak of floods that drowned the world, or fires that fell from the sky, or ages of darkness before the dawn, perhaps they carry echoes, maybe exaggerated, maybe blurred, but not entirely invented. Human memory is long in storytelling, but short in detail. We carry impressions, not archives. The thought that Earth may already have reset doesn't need to be frightening. In fact, it can be oddly grounding. It reminds us of how temporary everything is, how fragile the mark of our moment might be, and yet how persistent life itself remains. Dinosaurs fell, mammals rose, ice ages came, forests returned. Civilizations collapsed, new ones grew. Reset or not, the story always continues. And here we are, in this version of it, wondering whether we are the first or just one among many. When you close your eyes and think of the Earth beneath you, not just the surface but the deep layers of rock and time, you're resting on billions of years of resets, continents colliding, mountains eroding, oceans rising and retreating, species appearing and vanishing. Our moment is just the thin top layer, fragile and fleeting. And yet, it feels like everything. What if it isn't everything? What if there were others before, whose traces are buried deeper than we've yet dug? If so, then maybe the greatest secret of Earth isn't what's ahead of us, but what's already been forgotten. And that thought leads us gently into the next part of this journey, where we'll explore how the idea of a reset has lived in human imagination, in myths passed down through centuries, whispering of ages before ours that ended not with a slow fade, but with a sudden break. When we hear the word reset, it often sounds like something simple, almost mechanical. A button on a machine, a switch on a device, a quick restart to clear out the clutter and bring everything back to its first state. In the digital world we live in, the concept feels familiar, almost comforting. If your phone freezes, if your computer locks up, you restart it. If a game isn't going your way, you reload it. But when we apply that same idea to Earth, the meaning changes completely. A reset here isn't the gentle hum of a machine restarting. It's upheaval, transformation, erasure, and rebirth all at once. It's not something controlled or tidy. It's something messy, unpredictable, and often violent. And yet it might also be necessary, the way fire clears a forest so that something new can grow. To think about Earth resetting, it helps to move away from the image of a button. The planet isn't a gadget waiting for a reboot. It's a system, vast and layered, filled with cycles upon cycles. A reset here doesn't look like everything shutting down and starting fresh. Instead, it looks like one pattern breaking apart so another can take its place. Sometimes the shift is slow, stretched across millions of years. Other times it's abrupt, leaving no chance for adjustment. But in both cases, the result is the same. What was normal vanishes. What comes after barely resembles what came before. You can see this in the record of life. About 250 million years ago, Earth experienced what scientists call the Great Dying, the most severe extinction event in known history. More than 90% of all species disappeared. It wasn't a war or an asteroid alone. It was a convergence of catastrophes. Massive volcanic eruptions, climate swings, oceans turning toxic. It was as if Earth cleared the slate. What came after was a planet nearly empty compared to before. But slowly, life returned, and the new forms were entirely different. The ancestors of the dinosaurs rose in that empty world, filling niches that had once belonged to creatures no one alive today has ever seen. That wasn't just extinction. That was a reset. Another way to see it is in climate. Ice ages come and go, each one reshaping continents, carving valleys, burying entire ecosystems under glaciers, then retreating to let new forests grow. Each cycle erases evidence of the last, scrubbing landscapes clean. For the creatures living through it, it must have felt like the end of everything, the world collapsing under endless cold or flooding warmth. Yet, from the larger view, it was another version of the Earth's reset system, a way of balancing extremes, of pressing the cycle forward. But resets don't always need to be natural. Sometimes they're human. Think of a great city abandoned. Roads crumble, walls collapse, vegetation spreads over stone. Within a few centuries, what once felt permanent is reduced to scattered ruins. Civilizations rise and fall, each one believing it will last forever, each one leaving fragments behind when it doesn't. The fall of Rome was a kind of reset for Europe, plunging whole regions into centuries of disarray before new systems emerged. The collapse of the Maya cities left jungle-covered pyramids behind, while people adapted, changed, and rebuilt their lives in other ways. Each collapse wasn't the end of humanity, but it was the end of a world, a local reset that shifted the trajectory of millions of lives. The idea of a reset can feel frightening because it suggests impermanence. It suggests that nothing we build, no matter how large or advanced, is immune to being cleared away. But maybe that's also part of the deeper truth. Nothing is permanent. Earth itself shows us this in every mountain worn down by rain, in every coastline pulled back by tides, in every forest reborn after fire. Reset is part of the system, not an exception. It's also important to remember that resets don't erase everything. They don't necessarily mean total annihilation. A reset might sweep away structures, cultures, or species, but it leaves seeds. Survivors adapt, and those survivors become the foundation for whatever comes next. Think of the tiny mammals that scurried beneath the feet of dinosaurs. They were unremarkable compared to the giants above them. But when the asteroid hit, when fire and darkness ended the age of dinosaurs, those small survivors became the starting point of something new. In a sense, they were the reset button, not the cause, but the continuation. This perspective helps us look at human history differently. If Earth has already reset, if civilizations before us rose and fell, then maybe the fragments we see today are not anomalies, not strange mysteries, but the faint outlines of a cycle. Stone ruins we puzzle over might be the remains of earlier chapters. Legends of floods and fires might be cultural memories of resets endured. Our own achievements might one day become similar fragments, half buried, waiting for someone in the distant future to wonder what kind of people we were. The word reset can mislead us into thinking of a single moment, a clean break, a dramatic before and after. But more often, resets are layered. They happen in waves, each one reshaping part of the world until the overall effect feels complete. Imagine a forest after a wildfire. First the flames reset the surface, burning away the canopy, the undergrowth, the fallen logs. For a moment it looks like total devastation. But beneath the soil, seeds are waiting. Some species even require fire to germinate. Within months, shoots push through the ash. Within years, new trees reach upward. Within centuries, the forest is thick again, but it isn't the same. The old forest is gone. A new one has taken its place. That's the true nature of reset. Not a button, but a transformation. The question, then, is whether humans themselves are part of that system. Are we here for a single run, unique and unrepeatable? Or are we just the current form of something Earth has seen before? If humanity were erased tomorrow, would something like us rise again in 100,000 years, piecing together fire, tools, language and cities once more? Or are we the unlikely result of a unique set of conditions, fragile and temporary, destined to vanish with no sequel? These questions may never be answered with certainty, but they highlight the way resets force us to reconsider our place. Another layer worth exploring is how resets aren't always visible from within. Imagine living through the slow collapse of a civilization. To the people inside it, each year might feel like another struggle, another crisis, but not necessarily the end. Only when centuries pass does the pattern become clear. Only then do we look back and say, that was a reset. Right now, with climate change, shifting ecosystems, rising seas, and rapid technological upheaval, some wonder if we're in the middle of one ourselves. To us, it feels like everyday news, one challenge after another. But to someone in the distant future, might this age look like the moment everything shifted? Might they call it the reset of the early 21st century? Even the language we use reflects this possibility. We talk about starting over, rebuilding, bouncing back. These are the words of resets. They acknowledge that collapse is not always permanent, that new beginnings often hide inside endings. A city destroyed by fire is rebuilt stronger. A society fractured by crisis reorganizes. A species facing extinction sometimes adapts into a new form. Reset, in this sense, is not annihilation. It's transformation through loss. And so the image of a button is too small. Earth doesn't work like a device. Its resets are messy, unpredictable, and sometimes catastrophic, but they also carry the seeds of renewal. To think about Earth being reset is to think about cycles larger than ourselves, to imagine that the world has been cleared and reshaped many times before and maybe again. It isn't about a clean restart. It's about the ongoing story of change, with endings and beginnings tangled together, which leads us naturally into the next thought. If resets are part of the pattern, then it makes sense that humanity has tried to make sense of them through stories. Flood myths, fire myths, tales of destruction and rebirth. These aren't random inventions. They may be echoes of lived experience, softened into legend. And if nearly every culture remembers some version of the world being wiped clean, perhaps that is because the world has, more than once. When people try to make sense of resets, they don't always have science, geology, or data to rely on. For most of human history, what they had were stories. Stories to explain why the world looked the way it did, why rivers flooded, why mountains trembled, why stars vanished and returned. Stories were how knowledge survived when writing did not exist, and they were also how memory endured when events were too immense or painful to understand. Within those stories, we often find whispers, faint echoes that seem to describe resets in language shaped by culture, belief, and imagination. One of the most common of these stories is the flood. Across cultures, across continents, separated by oceans and centuries, flood myths appear again and again. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh tells of a deluge so vast it nearly ended humankind. The Hebrew Bible describes Noah building an ark to survive rising waters. Hindu traditions speak of Manu saved from a flood that destroyed the world. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha surviving when Zeus sent torrents to wash away the corruption of humanity. Even in the Americas, the Hopi, the Inca, and many others told of waters rising high enough to drown the world. How is it that so many separate cultures, often with little contact, carried such similar stories? The simplest explanation is that floods are common disasters. Rivers overflow, rains fall, coastlines are battered by storms. It makes sense that early societies would tell stories about survival and destruction by water. But the scale of these myths is often far greater than local experience. They don't describe a single valley flooding. They describe whole worlds ending, civilizations drowned, humanity nearly erased. That is more than a seasonal storm. That feels like memory of something vast. Perhaps not always literal oceans rising across the globe, but something large enough to be remembered across generations. Then there are myths of fire. In Norse tradition, the world ends in Ragnarok, flames consuming everything before it is born anew. In Hindu cosmology, Shiva dances destruction through fire before creation begins again. Indigenous traditions in North America speak of worlds ending in fire, only to be replaced by new ones. Even the Bible has echoes of fire in its apocalyptic visions, a final cleansing before renewal. Fire, like flood, is both destroyer and renewer. It clears, it consumes, and from its ash something new grows. If flood myths reflect the power of water to reset the earth, fire myths reflect the equal power of heat and flame. There are other kinds of myths too, stories of darkness that lasted so long it felt like the sun had been swallowed. In some traditions, monstrous creatures eat the sun and moon, plunging the world into night. In others, gods hide the light as punishment. Some of these stories may have roots in real events. Volcanic eruptions can darken skies for years, cooling climates and turning days grey. Meteor impacts can do the same. Even something as simple as a long eclipse, if not understood, could inspire stories of the sun being stolen. To those who lived through it, a darkened sky might feel like the end of the world. To their descendants, it might become a myth of cosmic reset. What ties these myths together is the idea of cycles. The world ends not once, but many times. Creation is not a single event, but something that happens again and again. The Aztec people believed the universe had already gone through multiple ages, each one destroyed by a different catastrophe. They lived in what they called the fifth sun, aware that 4 worlds had already perished before theirs. In Polynesian traditions, stories tell of worlds swallowed by the sea, only for land to rise again. The Maya had calendars that stretched far beyond ordinary lifetimes, marking ages that ended and began like the ticking of cosmic clocks. These were not just stories of survival, they were frameworks, ways of seeing reality itself as cyclical, fragile, and constantly renewed. If you listen closely, these myths sound less like fantasy and more like warnings, a reminder that the world is not stable, that the ground beneath us can shift, that life is always vulnerable to forces larger than ourselves. For ancient peoples, the myth was the lesson. Respect the river, respect the fire, respect the balance. Forget that, and the cycle might begin again. What makes these whispers intriguing is that they often appear in places separated by vast distance. Civilizations with no direct contact still carried versions of the same story. Floods, fires, darkness, rebirth. It's tempting to explain this as coincidence, or as the natural tendency of humans to imagine similar fears. But it's also possible that these stories carry shared fragments of something older, something experienced on a scale broad enough that many different peoples remembered it in their own way. If Earth did reset, even partially, the survivors would have told stories. Those stories would become myths, and the myths would remain long after the details were gone. Consider how fragile memory is even today. Imagine trying to explain climate change or nuclear power to someone thousands of years in the future if all our written records disappeared. Would they understand the science? Or would they remember it as a story of skies turning hot, oceans rising, fire falling from the heavens? Over time, the details blur, the science vanishes, and what survives is the myth. Maybe that is exactly what happened before. Some myths even speak directly of worlds before ours. The Hopi tell of previous worlds destroyed by fire, by ice, by flood, each one leading to a new beginning. The ancient Greeks told of ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each one declining until the gods ended it and began again. In Hindu cosmology, time is divided into yugas, vast cycles where humanity rises and falls, only to reset when the age ends. These aren't isolated traditions. They are part of a larger human pattern, the belief that we are not the first, that worlds have ended before, and will again. Archaeologists often treat these as metaphor, stories to explain natural cycles, to teach moral lessons, to give structure to human life, and often they are. But sometimes metaphor and memory overlap. A flood myth might reflect both the experience of living by a dangerous river and the memory of a much larger catastrophe. A fire myth might capture both the annual burning of fields and the ancient memory of skies darkened by volcanic ash. The line between story and record is not always clear. When you hear these myths told side by side, they begin to feel less like isolated fables and more like a chorus whispering the same theme. Earth has ended before, and it will again. Not always in the same way, not always for the same reasons, but always with the same outcome. Destruction followed by rebirth, collapse followed by renewal, memory followed by myth. This way of thinking doesn't need to be mystical. It can be practical. If myths preserve memories of resets, then listening to them can tell us something about resilience. They remind us that survival often depends on adaptation, on listening to warnings, on respecting forces larger than ourselves. They remind us that the world is fragile and that pretending it will last forever unchanged is a mistake. At the same time, myths offer comfort. If the world has ended before and been renewed, then endings are not final. They are part of the rhythm. Just as seasons change, just as days turn to nights, so too do worlds pass and begin again. For ancient peoples, this may have been the most important lesson of all. So when we think of Earth being reset, we don't have to imagine it as something far away or impossible. We can see it in the stories that survived. We can hear it in the whispers of myths that travelled across continents and centuries. Maybe they are warnings, maybe they are memories, maybe they are both. But either way, they are a reminder that what we call permanent is never truly so, and that the idea of a reset has always been with us, carried not in machines or buttons, but in the oldest stories we tell. And as those stories linger, they lead us naturally to another path. If myths whisper of resets, perhaps the rocks themselves hold louder voices, catastrophes written not in words, but in layers of stone and fossil, marking the moments when Earth truly did clear its slate and begin again. When you look at the long history of our planet, you start to notice a rhythm made up not of gentle shifts, but of violent interruptions. Floods that swallow landscapes, fires that rage until entire ecosystems vanish, and ages that seem to disappear so completely they might as well have never existed. We call them extinctions, collapses, disasters. But another way to see them is as resets. They are moments when the slate is wiped cleaner than we can easily imagine, and something new takes its place. Take the floods first. It doesn't take much imagination to see why ancient people feared water. It could nourish, carrying fertile soil across fields, or it could destroy, rising without warning and carrying entire villages away. The rivers that cradled early civilizations, the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, were generous but also ruthless. When they overflowed, they reminded everyone that nature had the power to reset lives overnight. But floods on the scale remembered in myths or recorded in geological evidence were far more than seasonal disasters. Around 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended, glaciers melted rapidly. Seas rose hundreds of feet, swallowing coastlines and transforming maps forever. Entire regions that had been home to people were drowned, leaving behind memories that could easily become legends of a world lost to rising waters. Doggerland, the land that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, is now beneath the North Sea. Sunderland in Southeast Asia, once a vast stretch of fertile land, is now hidden under the ocean. If people lived there, if they built communities and cultures, all of it was erased by the flood. To them, it would not have felt like slow change, it would have felt like the end. Now, consider fire. It may seem strange to talk about fire on the scale of global resets, but fire has been just as much a player in Earth's story. Forests burn naturally, lightning sparking blazes that clear old growth and make way for new. But sometimes fire has come from far more devastating sources. Massive volcanic eruptions can coat skies in ash, choke rivers, and set entire continents ablaze. The eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia about 75,000 years ago may have plunged the Earth into a volcanic winter, cooling climates and reducing human populations dramatically. Whether it brought humanity close to extinction or not, it was the kind of event that left scars in both the land and human memory. Imagine living through skies that stayed dark for years, crops failing, herds disappearing, and fire raining from mountains. It would have seemed like the world itself was burning. And then there are fires that come not from within the Earth, but from above. When an asteroid or comet strikes, the energy released is beyond comprehension. Forests thousands of miles away ignite. Shockwaves travel across oceans. Dust and soot fill the air. 66 million years ago, when a 10-kilometer asteroid slammed into what is now Mexico, the dinosaurs' reign ended not just in impact, but in fire. The heat from the blast was enough to ignite forests on the other side of the planet. For the creatures alive then, it must have been a nightmare beyond imagination. A world engulfed by flames, followed by years of cold darkness. It was the end of an age, one of many forgotten by all but the fossils left behind. Between the floods and the fires, entire ages have vanished. The Ordovician extinction about 450 million years ago erased most marine life. The Devonian extinction thinned out the seas again, wiping out reefs that had dominated oceans for millions of years. The Permian extinction, the Great Dying, cleared away nearly everything alive. The Cretaceous extinction ended the dinosaurs' rule. Each of these moments erased so much that, if you could have looked at the world before and after, you might not even recognize it as the same planet. And yet here we are, walking on the far side of those forgotten ages. What's striking is how complete these resets often are. In the Permian extinction, 9 out of 10 species disappeared. Entire ecosystems simply ceased to exist. Imagine walking into a forest and realizing that nearly every plant, every insect, every animal is gone. Imagine oceans turning lifeless. That is what Earth has endured, not once, but many times. Each time, life returned, but it returned different. The survivors were reshaped by the world they inherited, and the forgotten ages became foundations for something new. It's tempting to think of these events as ancient, far removed from our world of cities and satellites. But in geological terms, they're not so distant. The last great reset, the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, happened 66 million years ago. That may sound enormous, but in the span of Earth's history, it's the blink of an eye. If you compressed all of Earth's 4.5 billion years into a single day, that impact would have happened just minutes before midnight. And in those minutes, mammals rose, primates evolved, and eventually humans appeared. In a sense, we are living in the aftershock of a reset, the beneficiaries of a disaster that cleared the way for us. Floods, fires, forgotten ages, these are not just tragedies. They are reminders that the world we know is not the only version of Earth. Other versions existed, filled with creatures and landscapes we will never see. Other versions may have carried species intelligent in ways we cannot imagine, though none have left clear traces. The silence of those forgotten ages is both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because life endured, unsettling because it reminds us how easily everything we know could vanish. It's worth remembering that forgotten ages don't have to be measured in millions of years. Even in human history, there are ages we barely remember. The collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE is still partly a mystery. Great cities fell, writing systems vanished, and knowledge was lost for centuries. To those who lived through it, it must have felt like the end of the world, even though humanity continued. In the ruins left behind, in fragments of pottery and collapsed walls, we see the faint outline of a forgotten age. Multiply that across deeper time, and you begin to understand how much can be erased. When we think of Earth resetting, it's easy to focus on the violence of it, the floods, the fires, the endings. But there's another side too. Resets make space for renewal. Without the asteroid impact, mammals might never have risen. Without the volcanic winters, ecosystems might never have shifted in ways that allowed new species to thrive. Without the end of forgotten ages, we would not be here. That doesn't make the suffering less real, but it shows the pattern. Reset, regrowth, renewal. For us today, these stories of floods, fires, and forgotten ages are more than history. They are reminders that the Earth we live on is still capable of the same. Sea levels can rise again. Volcanoes can erupt again. Asteroids still orbit the sun. Ages can still end. We live with the illusion of permanence, but history shows otherwise. The question isn't whether Earth can reset, but when, how, and what will follow. And that brings us to an unsettling thought. If ages can vanish so completely, if floods and fires can erase so much, how do we know this is the first time? How do we know that humanity itself has not been through smaller resets before? Perhaps not erased entirely, but pushed back far enough that only fragments remained, later reimagined as myths. Perhaps there were whole societies we have not yet uncovered, their stories buried beneath oceans or ash, their memory fading into silence. And perhaps, like the fossils of forgotten creatures, fragments of those lives still wait to be found. If you've ever looked at a clock and felt reassured by its steady rhythm, it's tempting to imagine that time itself is neat and orderly. Seconds tick into minutes, minutes into hours, and everything feels predictable. But when you replace that simple clock with the Earth itself, the rhythm changes completely. Here the ticks are not seconds or minutes, but millions of years. And instead of predictability, the hand that moves forward is marked by catastrophe. Earth keeps its own time, and its clock often strikes with resets that we only see when we look back across vast spans of history. Geologists read that clock not on dials, but in rocks. Each layer of sediment, each band of fossil, each mineral trace is part of the Earth's record. When you cut through cliffs or drill deep into cores, you're looking at pages of a book written over billions of years. And scattered throughout those pages are interruptions, sudden breaks in the pattern, mass extinctions, layers of ash, gaps where entire ecosystems vanish between one layer and the next. It is as if the clock doesn't just keep time, it announces resets, the Earth's own alarm system ringing in catastrophe. One of the clearest examples is the thin band of clay that marks the end of the Cretaceous period. If you travel to certain parts of the world and find rocks of that age, you will see it. A dark line rich in iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids. Above that line, fossils of dinosaurs are gone. Below it, they flourish. That tiny layer is the moment when an asteroid struck and reset the world. a geological clock hand moving forward with a soundless tick, one that took millions of years to recover from. Another example lies deeper, in the rocks marking the end of the Permian period. Here, the clock records devastation on a scale even greater than the asteroid strike. Volcanic eruptions in Siberia lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, pouring lava across vast areas, releasing gases that poisoned air and oceans. The geological record shows coal beds burning, oceans turning anoxic, species disappearing one after another. When the clock struck that hour, 9 out of 10 species died. The planet didn't just suffer, it nearly stopped breathing. And yet, in time, life crept back, filling the silence left by that catastrophe. The fascinating part of this geological clock is how regular it seems to be. Not exact like a wristwatch, but rhythmic. Some scientists have noticed that major extinction events and upheavals seem to fall into cycles, tens of millions of years apart. The causes may vary: asteroids, volcanoes, shifting climates. But the effect is the same. The clock ticks forward, and life resets. It's as if Earth has a built-in rhythm of destruction and renewal, one that operates far beyond human scales. When we measure our lives, we think in decades. When we measure civilizations, we think in centuries or millennia. But when the Earth measures itself, it thinks in epochs. Whole ages that last millions of years, each one marked by its own particular balance of climate, life and geography. And when that balance tips too far, the clock resets. To us, it looks like sudden catastrophe. To the Earth, it may just be the next tick of the hand. What makes this perspective both humbling and unsettling is how small we are in comparison. Our entire recorded history fits into a sliver of geological time, barely the blink of an eye on this clock. The rise of agriculture, the building of cities, the invention of writing, the spread of technology, all of it happened in the last 10,000 years. Set against the billions of years recorded in stone, that is less than a second. And in that second, we've come to believe that our world is permanent, that history is continuous, that nothing before us could have existed and been erased. But the geological clock says otherwise. It shows us that resets are not exceptions, but the rhythm of the planet. Think of the ice ages. In the last 2.5 million years, Earth has cycled through at least 20 of them. Sheets of ice kilometers thick spread across continents, then retreated, then spread again. Each time, ecosystems shifted, species vanished, and others emerged. For early humans, these shifts must have been overwhelming. Glaciers advancing, climates collapsing, lands changing under their feet. And yet, those experiences are only the most recent ticks of the clock. If you rewind further, the changes grow even larger. Entire continents collide and break apart. Oceans appear and vanish. Mountain ranges rise and erode. Every movement is another stroke of the clock's hand. The phrase geological catastrophe might sound slow, but not all resets take millions of years. Some are as sudden as the fall of an asteroid. Some unfold in centuries, just long enough for those living through them to feel as though the world itself is collapsing piece by piece. When the Sahara turned from green grasslands into desert around 5,000 years ago, it reshaped human history. Civilizations moved, cultures adapted, and myths of lost fertile lands were born. For those who lived it, the reset was not abstract. It was daily survival, a clock striking in a way that forced entire societies to change. What's striking about the geological record is not just the resets themselves, but the silences they leave. After a catastrophe, the diversity of fossils shrinks. For millions of years, life may seem thinner, less vibrant, fewer species recorded in stone. Then, gradually the richness returns. To read these layers is to feel the passage of time not as continuity, but as pulses. Abundance, collapse, silence, renewal. Over and over again. The Earth's clock doesn't measure steady growth. It measures cycles of catastrophe and recovery. For us, this is more than an academic observation. It's a reminder that we are living on a clock that has struck catastrophe many times before. The hands are still moving. We may not hear the ticking in our daily lives, but geologists can see it in every cliff, every canyon, every core of ice drilled from Antarctica. And when we understand that rhythm, we begin to see ourselves differently. We are not separate from it. We are part of it. Our species, our civilizations, our technologies are all subject to the same ticking. Some scientists even suggest that we may be approaching another tick. The rate of species extinction today is far higher than in normal times. Climate is shifting faster than in many past eras. Oceans are warming and acidifying. From the geological perspective, it looks disturbingly like the early stages of another reset. Not as dramatic as an asteroid in a single day, but a catastrophe measured in centuries, still fast enough to be devastating for us. If the geological clock is about to strike again, it may not be by accident. It may be us winding it forward. But whether caused by nature or by ourselves, the clock does not stop. It has struck before, it will strike again, and the resets it marks are part of the Earth's story. For us, the challenge is not to stop the clock, because that is impossible, but to understand its rhythm, to recognise the patterns, and perhaps to soften the blow when the next tick comes. When you think of the Earth in this way, it changes how you see your place. You're not just living in a moment, you're living on the surface of a clock that has been keeping time for billions of years. You're standing on the layered evidence of floods, fires, extinctions, forgotten ages. Every rock under your feet, every fossil in a museum, every cliff carved by wind and water is a tick of that clock. And when it strikes again, as it surely will, our world will change once more. And that thought leads us naturally into the next path. If the geological clock tells us resets are inevitable, then the story of life is about what comes after. Extinction may be the end for some, but for others, it is the opening of a new chapter. Each catastrophe clears space for renewal, and each renewal reshapes the course of evolution. The clock does not just mark destruction, it also marks the beginnings that rise from it. When most people hear the word extinction, the first feeling that comes to mind is loss. A creature gone forever, a branch of life cut off with no return. And that feeling is not wrong. Extinction means endings, and endings are rarely easy to face. But when we look at the long sweep of Earth's history, extinction is not just about loss. It is also about transformation. Each time a species disappears, it leaves behind space, opportunities, and niches that something else will fill. Extinction, in a strange and often brutal way, is one of the planet's restart keys. It wipes the board clean enough for something new to take shape. Without extinction, the world as we know it would not exist. Think of the dinosaurs. They were not a single species, but a vast collection of them, thriving for over 150 million years. They ruled every continent, filled every environment, from tiny bird-like hunters to massive long-necked giants. If you lived in their time, you would have thought they would last forever. But 66 million years ago, a single asteroid changed everything. Forests burned, skies darkened, climates collapsed. Within a short geological moment, nearly all the dinosaurs were gone, and yet that catastrophe made space for mammals to rise. Small, unnoticed creatures that had lived in the shadows of giants suddenly found themselves in a world emptied of competition. From them came primates, from primates came us. Without that extinction, there would be no humans telling the story at all. The same pattern appears again and again in the fossil record. When the Permian extinction erased 90% of life, it seemed like the end. But in its aftermath, new groups of animals and plants spread into the empty spaces. When the Devonian extinction thinned the oceans, it cleared the way for other marine life to dominate. Each extinction is a tragedy for those who vanish, but for those who survive, it is an opportunity. That is why we call extinction a reset key. Not because it is merciful, but because it changes the game so completely that life must start fresh. even in smaller scales, extinction plays this role. Islands often tell the story in miniature. A new island forms from volcanic rock, bare and lifeless. Over time, species arrive, birds, insects, plants, carried by wind and water. They flourish, adapt, and fill the landscape with unique forms. But then a storm, a flood, or the arrival of an invasive species wipes many of them out. For the island, it is a reset. Some species survive, others do not. But the cycle begins again. The island story is simply a smaller version of the Earth story. For humans, extinction carries an added layer of meaning. We are witnesses to it, sometimes even its cause. When we read about the dodo or the passenger pigeon, we don't just see fossils in rock. We see creatures erased within human memory, gone because of hunting or habitat loss. We realise extinction is not just ancient history, but a living reality. And when we see species vanishing today at accelerated rates, it forces us to ask what kind of reset we are shaping. Are we creating space for renewal? Or are we pressing the restart key too hard, too fast, in ways that leave less resilience behind? Extinction as a restart key does not mean it is desirable. It is not something to celebrate. It is simply part of how life renews itself on this planet. Each mass extinction clears the stage, and the survivors rewrite the play. Without that harsh rhythm, evolution might stagnate. With it, life diversifies again and again, creating new forms, new possibilities. The world we know is built on countless layers of endings. Every tree, every bird, every human exists because something else ended first. There is also another way extinction resets the world, one that's less obvious. It reshapes ecosystems by removing dominant players. When a top predator vanishes, prey species multiply, vegetation changes, and the entire system reorganizes. When a keystone species disappears, like a coral or a large herbivore, everything around it shifts. The extinction of mammoths, for example, changed grasslands into forests in many regions, altering climates in subtle ways. These changes ripple outward, touching everything from soil to weather. Extinction is not just about species, it is about systems. And when systems reset, life adapts to the new rules. The idea that extinction is a restart key also forces us to think about ourselves. If humanity vanished tomorrow, what would follow? Our absence would be a reset for the planet. Cities would crumble, forests would spread, animals would fill abandoned landscapes. In a few thousand years, traces of us would be faint. In a few million, they might be nearly gone. New species would rise, filling spaces we left behind. The Earth would not grieve, it would reset. That thought is sobering, but also strangely grounding. It reminds us that we are not separate from the cycle. We are participants, and possibly one day we too could be reset. This perspective can feel harsh, but it also carries a kind of balance. Life is not fragile because of extinction. Life is resilient because of it. The reset key may erase, but it also allows renewal. That does not mean we should invite extinction or accelerate it needlessly. It means we should understand it as part of the larger story. Every end is also a beginning. Every catastrophe carries the seeds of renewal. When you look at the fossil record, you see this clearly. After each extinction, there is a burst of new species, new forms, new possibilities. Paleontologists call this adaptive radiation. It is as if life, suddenly freed from old constraints, explodes into new directions. The rise of mammals after the dinosaurs is just one example. After the Permian extinction, reptiles expanded into forms that dominated the Triassic. After the Devonian extinction, new kinds of fish and early amphibians spread. Extinction resets the board, and evolution takes its next turn. If extinction is a reset key, then we must also recognize that it does not work alone. It is part of the larger rhythm of floods, fires, climate shifts, and cosmic impacts. Together, these forces keep the Earth from remaining static. They ensure that life is never finished, never final, always reshaping. In that sense, extinction is not just loss, it is motion. It is the Earth reminding us that permanence is an illusion, that survival depends on adaptation, and that even endings are part of the design. For us, the challenge is to live with this awareness, to know that extinction has shaped us, that without it we would not exist, and that with it the future will not look like today. We can mourn what is lost, we can work to protect what remains, but we can also understand the deeper rhythm. Extinction is Earth's way of resetting, and from each reset the story continues. And so, when we think of resets not as sudden buttons but as cycles, extinction becomes one of the clearest keys, not merciful, not kind, but essential to the rhythm of life. It clears, it reshapes, it opens doors that would otherwise remain closed. Without it, the clock of Earth would have ticked differently, and we would not be here to wonder about it at all. That brings us naturally to another question. If extinction and resets are part of life's rhythm, what does that mean for the civilizations that rise and fall upon this planet? Are we unique in our fragility, or have there been others before us who faced their own resets, their own erasures, their own silences? And if so, what remains of them now, hidden beneath soil, stone, or sea? When people hear the phrase lost civilization, it often stirs images of ancient cities swallowed by jungles, crumbling temples buried in sand, or stone monuments rising out of forgotten valleys. We think of explorers stumbling through vines to find ruins, or divers swimming through sunken streets beneath the sea. But the real mystery of lost civilizations is much deeper than any single discovery. It is the question of how much human history may have existed and then vanished, erased so thoroughly that only fragments remain, leaving us to wonder whether what we know is only part of the story. Every time archaeologists uncover a lost city, we are reminded of how fragile memory is. Pompeii lay hidden under volcanic ash for nearly 2,000 years, forgotten by the outside world until it was uncovered by accident. Machu Picchu sat high in the Andes, known to locals but unknown to the wider world until explorers brought it to light. The ruins of Angkor in Cambodia were once the heart of a mighty empire, but were swallowed by forests when that empire collapsed. Each rediscovery feels dramatic, but it also raises a quiet question. If these could be forgotten for centuries or even millennia, how many others have been erased completely with no trace left at all? The further back we look, the less certain we become. Written history stretches back only about 5,000 years. Before that, we rely on artifacts, on bones, on tools, and before that, we rely on what little the Earth has preserved, often scattered and incomplete. Yet even within recorded history, mysteries remain. The Indus Valley Civilization, one of the world's earliest urban cultures, left behind sprawling cities with sophisticated drainage systems, grid-like streets, and trade networks stretching thousands of miles. But their writing has not yet been fully deciphered, and much of their story remains hidden. They flourished for centuries and then disappeared, leaving behind ruins but few answers. Was it climate change, shifting rivers, disease, or conflict? Whatever the cause, one of humanity's first great civilizations became a ghost, known more by its silence than its words. And then there are places where legends blur into archaeology. Atlantis is the most famous, a story told by Plato of a great island civilization that sank into the sea. Many scholars believe it was a metaphor, a parable about hubris and downfall, but the idea of a lost world swallowed by water has echoed ever since. Others speak of Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, or Mu in the Pacific, imagined lands said to have held civilizations that are now gone. While no evidence proves these myths, they reveal something about human imagination. We seem to instinctively sense that not all stories have been told, that the past might hold more than we've yet uncovered. Some of that instinct may come from the strange out-of-place artifacts that occasionally surface. A hammered piece of metal in a layer of rock older than expected. A map from the Renaissance that seems to show coastlines shaped by ice-free Antarctica. Carvings or megaliths whose age or purpose is uncertain. Most of these puzzles eventually find explanations, but not always. And even when they do, they remind us how incomplete the picture is. Archaeology is not a finished story, but an ongoing search. For every site uncovered, countless others are still buried or destroyed. The oceans deepen the mystery. More than 70% of Earth's surface is water, and most of it has never been explored in detail. Rising seas at the end of the last ice age drowned vast areas where humans once lived. If coastal civilizations existed 12 or 15,000 years ago, much of their evidence would now be hundreds of feet underwater. Occasionally, divers find hints: stone structures off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni, submerged ruins near India's Gulf of Cambay, strange formations off the Bahamas. Some are natural, some human-made, some still debated. But the idea that entire chapters of human history might lie beneath the waves is hard to ignore. Even on land, erosion, vegetation and time erase more than we preserve. Wooden structures rot, cloth decays, mud brick dissolves. Only stone and metal tend to survive long enough to be found, and even then, much can vanish in a few thousand years. If our own world were abandoned today, how much of it would remain 10,000 years from now? Skyscrapers would crumble, roads would break apart, electronics would corrode. The ruins of some great cities might endure, but most of what defines our era, our knowledge, our technology, would be lost. Now extend that thought backward. If there were civilizations before the ones we know, ones that rose and fell tens of thousands of years ago, how much would remain? Perhaps only myths, perhaps nothing at all. This is why the mystery of lost civilizations captures so much attention. It isn't just about curiosity or romance. It's about the possibility that our story isn't as unique as we think, that maybe humanity has risen before, achieved wonders, and then been reset, that maybe what we call the beginning is actually another middle, and we are part of a cycle we barely understand. There are fragments that hint at this possibility. The city of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is over 11,000 years old, built long before writing, long before agriculture was believed to be widespread. Its carved pillars and monumental structures challenge the timeline of civilization, suggesting complex societies existed earlier than we thought. If one site can push the timeline back thousands of years, how many others might still be buried, waiting to tell us more? The challenge is that time is a relentless eraser. Every century more evidence disappears, earthquakes bury cities, rivers shift and wash away settlements, forests reclaim structures, and the deeper we go into the past, the less survives. Eventually, history itself dissolves into prehistory, and prehistory dissolves into silence. That silence is where the mystery grows. When you hear stories of lost civilizations, it's easy to dismiss them as fantasy. But when you look at the gaps in our knowledge, the silence of the record, the vast areas still unexplored, you realize the possibility is not so far-fetched. We may not have proof of Atlantis or Lemuria, but we do have proof of forgotten cities, lost for millennia until chance revealed them. We do have proof that entire cultures once thrived and then vanished, and if it happened once, it can happen again. The mystery of lost civilizations is not just about the past, it also reflects on our future. If our world collapsed tomorrow, if seas rose and power grids failed, what would remain of us in 10,000 years? Would future archaeologists find fragments of glass, concrete and plastic and wonder what kind of people we were? Would they tell stories of a lost age of machines, half-believed myths about people who touched the stars? Or would they find nothing at all, only silence where we once lived? In this way, the mystery of lost civilizations becomes a mirror. It reflects back at us our own fragility, our own impermanence. We're used to thinking of ourselves as the pinnacle, the culmination of history, but perhaps we're simply another expression of humanity, one that may fade as others did before us. Perhaps we're not the first to build, not the first to wonder, not the first to imagine permanence, only to discover how temporary it all is. And so, when we speak of lost civilizations, we're not just speaking of ruins in jungles or temples under the sea. We're speaking of the possibility that our story is incomplete, that Earth has already reset us once, twice, or many times. We're speaking of the silence between the lines of history, where entire worlds may have existed and disappeared. And we're speaking of the reminder that no matter how advanced, no matter how mighty, no civilization is beyond the reach of time. Which naturally leads to another thought. If civilizations can vanish, if entire ages can be erased, then the cycles of Earth are not just about species or ecosystems. They are about us too. And to understand those cycles, we must look at the grand patterns of climate and catastrophe, the rhythms of ice and fire that sweep across the planet, reshaping it again and again. There are some names that seem to echo louder than others when we talk about the idea of forgotten worlds. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. These names have slipped into legend, into literature, into the endless cycle of speculation. They are not just stories about cities or islands. They are symbols, shorthand for the idea that perhaps the Earth once held entire civilizations that are now gone. Whether real or imagined, these dreamlands fascinate us because they remind us that the past is not always as certain as we think, and that our sense of permanence may be little more than a comforting illusion. Atlantis is the most famous of these names. First mentioned by Plato more than 2,000 years ago, it was described as a great island civilization, advanced and powerful, that fell out of favour with the gods and was swallowed by the sea. To Plato, it was an allegory, a way to talk about hubris, corruption, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. But over the centuries, the story took on a life of its own. Was it real? Was it a memory of some forgotten civilization? People have looked for Atlantis everywhere, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to Antarctica. Each new theory sparks excitement, and each new disappointment only deepens the legend. Even though archaeologists find no hard evidence, the name continues to haunt us. We want Atlantis to be real, not just because it would rewrite history, but because it would prove that we are not the first to rise, that others came before us and left only whispers behind. Lemuria has a different origin. In the 19th century, scientists trying to explain the distribution of lemurs and other species across distant continents proposed the existence of a lost land in the Indian Ocean. They called it Lemuria, a great continent now vanished beneath the waves. Later, as geology advanced, plate tectonics replaced the need for such a landmass. Lemuria, as science, disappeared, but as legend, it grew stronger. Writers, mystics and dreamers began to imagine it as a lost paradise, home to advanced beings, perhaps even the birthplace of humanity itself. The scientific hypothesis faded, but the dreamland remained, shifting from geology into myth. Then there is Mu, a lost continent said to lie in the Pacific, popularised in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by writers who claimed it had once been the cradle of civilization. Like Lemuria, Mu has no basis in geology. The Pacific Ocean is far too deep and old to have hidden a vanished continent of that scale. But the idea caught hold in the imagination, inspiring novels, esoteric traditions, and endless speculation. Mu became a symbol, like Atlantis, of a world erased so thoroughly that only faint echoes remain. What all these dreamlands share is the human desire to fill in the silence of the past. We know history is incomplete. We know that much has been lost, and so we imagine what might have existed, what might have been erased by flood or fire, what might still lie hidden under oceans or ice. Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu are less about literal places and more about possibilities. They are the names we give to our suspicion that the story is bigger than we've been told, and while science may not support the literal existence of these continents, it does not erase the underlying truth. Land has vanished before, coastlines have drowned, islands have risen and sunk. Entire regions where people once lived are now underwater. Doggerland, once a fertile land connecting Britain to Europe, is gone beneath the North Sea. Sunderland, once a vast stretch of Southeast Asia, lies beneath the waters of Indonesia. Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and North America, disappeared as seas rose. If these places had been remembered in stories, they might have sounded like Atlantis too. That is why the legend endures. It is not that we need Atlantis itself to be real, but that we know the Earth has already erased places where people lived, loved, built, and dreamed. It is not hard to imagine how a great flood, remembered in myth, could become the story of a lost world. It is not hard to imagine survivors passing down tales of lands that no longer existed, tales that later became allegories, then legends, then dreamlands. The fascination with these lost worlds also reflects something about us today. We live in a time where satellites map every mountain, submarines explore the deep, and scientists drill into ice to read the past. And yet, despite all our knowledge, there are still gaps, mysteries, uncertainties. Atlantis reminds us that even with technology, we don't know everything. Lemuria and Mu remind us that our explanations of the world are always changing, that what we dismiss today might look different tomorrow. These names survive because they touch something deeper than facts. They touch the part of us that suspects the past is stranger than we imagine. Even if Atlantis never existed, the search for it has uncovered real wonders. Archaeologists, driven by the legend, have found ancient cities on coasts, submerged ruins, forgotten cultures. In trying to find one dreamland, we often discover truths about others, and so the story becomes less about proving or disproving a single place, and more about acknowledging that the world is full of silences waiting to be filled. If Atlantis and Lemuria and Mu are dreamlands, then they are also mirrors. They reflect back our anxieties and our hopes. We fear collapse, so we tell stories of great civilizations destroyed. We long for origins, so we imagine lost homelands where humanity began. We sense the fragility of our own world, so we project it backward, creating cautionary tales dressed as history. These dreamlands are part of how we grapple with the possibility of reset. They let us imagine that we are not the first, that there is precedent, that Earth has already cleared the slate before, and perhaps in some ways they are truer than we realise. Maybe not in the literal sense of continents vanishing overnight, but in the deeper sense of memory transformed into myth. Maybe Atlantis was not a single island, but the memory of rising seas that drowned countless coasts. Maybe Lemuria was not a continent, but the faint echo of vanished lands beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean. Maybe Mu was not real geography, but the recognition that cultures have been lost so completely that they feel like they belong to another world. To dwell on these dreamlands is not to abandon science, but to recognise how imagination fills the spaces where knowledge is silent. And in those spaces we find reminders that resets are not abstract. They are personal, they are remembered, they are carried in stories across centuries, sometimes blurred, sometimes exaggerated, but never entirely invented. So when you hear the name Atlantis, or Lemuria, or Mu, you can think of them as fantasy if you like, or you can think of them as metaphors for the countless worlds that have already been erased by time. Either way, they remind us that the Earth is a place of beginnings and endings, of civilizations rising and falling, of memory dissolving into legend, and they lead us toward another truth, that these resets are not just human stories, but natural cycles written into the planet itself, cycles of ice and fire that sweep across ages, erasing and renewing, marking the rhythm of Earth's long memory. If you step back far enough to look at Earth not in centuries or even millennia, but in tens of thousands of years, a pattern begins to reveal itself. It is a rhythm not of human history but of planetary climate, and its beat is driven by ice and fire. These cycles are the metronome of the planet, the forces that have shaped every ecosystem, every migration, every rise and fall of life. They are resets on a scale so vast that we often fail to notice them, but they are there, written into the rocks, the ice cores, and even the stories passed down through generations. Ice is the quieter of the two forces, but no less powerful. Over the last 2.5 million years, the Earth has slipped in and out of ice ages again and again. Huge sheets of ice, miles thick, advanced across continents, carving valleys, pushing mountains into sharper peaks, grinding landscapes into new shapes. Then, just as steadily, the ice retreated, leaving behind seas, rivers, and fertile plains. These cycles follow the slow dance of Earth's orbit and tilt, subtle shifts that change how sunlight strikes the planet. They don't happen overnight, but over tens of thousands of years. And yet, for the people and creatures living through them, they must have felt like the end of the world. Imagine standing in Europe 20,000 years ago, with glaciers stretching as far as the eye could see. Imagine living in North America as advancing ice pushed people southward, forcing them to adapt or perish. Imagine the cold, the scarcity, the endless winters that stretched for generations, and then imagine the melt, when the ice pulled back and oceans rose, drowning coastlines and scattering communities. These were not just changes of weather, they were resets of entire worlds. Fire, on the other hand, is the sudden partner of ice. It comes in eruptions, in infernos, in explosions from the Earth's core or from the skies above. Supervolcanoes like Yellowstone or Toba have erupted with such force that they blanketed skies in ash, cooled the planet for years, and starved entire populations. Ordinary volcanoes reshape landscapes in smaller but still devastating ways, burning forests, burying cities, creating new land where once there was sea. And then there are the cosmic fires, the impacts of asteroids that release more energy in a moment than all the weapons of humanity combined. When these fires come, they are swift. Unlike ice, which advances slowly, fire resets with shocking speed. Together, ice and fire create a rhythm of destruction and renewal. Ice scours the land, forcing life into refuges and then releasing it to spread anew. Fire burns or darkens the skies, killing many but opening niches for others. Between the two, life is constantly tested, reset, and reimagined. If you trace the fossil record, you see bursts of evolution that follow these cycles. Species adapting to cold, then to warmth, then to ash-darkened skies, then to new forests after fire. The story of Earth is not steady progress, but adaptation to extremes. Even within human history, these cycles have left deep marks. The last ice age shaped where people could live, pushing them into warmer regions and carving paths of migration. When the ice retreated, new lands opened, fertile soils spread, rivers changed course. The flooding of Doggerland, the transformation of the Sahara from green to desert, the reshaping of coastlines across Asia and the Americas, these were direct consequences of ice retreating. Fire has marked us too. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE devastated the Minoan civilization, leaving behind ruins that some think may have inspired the Atlantis myth. The eruption of Tambora in 1815 plunged the world into the year without a summer, with crops failing and famines spreading. These are reminders that ice and fire are not distant, abstract forces. They are part of our lived story. The cycles also remind us of how fragile permanence is. A fertile valley may be buried under ice in one age and then bloom again in another. A great forest may be wiped out by fire and replaced by grasslands. Even oceans shift, their coastlines redrawn with every major melt or freeze. Nothing is fixed, everything is in motion. To think of the Earth this way is to see it as a restless system, always resetting, always reshaping. The interplay of ice and fire also highlights how small we are within these cycles. Our entire recorded history took place during a rare moment of climatic stability, a warm interglacial period between ice ages. It is this stability that allowed agriculture, cities, and civilizations to flourish. But this stability is not the norm. The geological record shows us that extremes are far more common. Ice and fire take turns, and in between, life adapts. We live in one of those in-between moments, but the cycles are still turning, even if we don't feel them day to day. There is something humbling in realizing that ice and fire are not enemies but partners in the same dance. They both erase and renew, they both destroy and create. Without them, Earth would be static and life would be far less diverse. The valleys carved by glaciers are among the most fertile places today. The soils enriched by volcanic ash are among the most productive. The scars of resets become the seeds of abundance. This doesn't make the cycles any less harsh. For those caught in them, they are catastrophic. Species vanish, ecosystems collapse, civilizations crumble. But for the Earth, they are simply the rhythm of its long memory, the pattern by which it keeps time. Ice advances, fire erupts, and the world begins again. And as we think about these cycles, we also have to ask what role we now play within them. Humanity has learned to harness fire, to reshape landscapes, to alter climates. In some ways, we have become another form of reset, driving extinctions, changing coastlines, warming the planet. Our actions are accelerating changes that once took millennia. We are, perhaps without meaning to, adding a new note to the rhythm of ice and fire. But even in this, the lesson remains the same. Resets are not ends, they are transformations. Ice and fire remind us that nothing is permanent, that life endures not by resisting change but by adapting to it. And they remind us that what we call catastrophe may also be the beginning of something new, even if we cannot see it from where we stand. Which leads us naturally to another part of the story. If the Earth itself has a way of resetting through cycles of ice and fire, then it is not only the land and the climate that are renewed. The planet also has a way of healing itself, of finding balance after even the harshest resets, and that healing, though slow, is one of the most powerful forces of all. When you think of the scale of destruction Earth has endured, asteroids slamming into its surface, supervolcanoes darkening the skies, glaciers burying continents, it can seem impossible that life ever recovered at all. And yet, somehow, it always has. The story of this planet is not just one of catastrophe, but of healing. Over and over again, after every collapse, the Earth has found ways to mend itself. Not instantly, not gently, but steadily, over timescales so vast that we can only glimpse the outlines. The healing is not perfect. Many species never return. Many landscapes remain forever altered. But it is enough to keep life moving forward. The first thing to understand is that healing doesn't mean erasing the past. When a forest burns, the ash enriches the soil and new growth eventually emerges. The scars remain, but the system adapts and builds on what came before. On the scale of the entire planet, the same pattern holds. After each mass extinction, life has not gone back to exactly what it was. It has restructured itself, filling empty niches with new forms. The Earth heals not by restoring what was lost, but by creating space for what comes next. One of the most striking examples is what happened after the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs. For a time, the Earth must have seemed broken beyond repair. Forests burned across continents. Dust and soot filled the skies, shutting out sunlight for months. Temperatures plummeted. Food chains collapsed, and yet in that silence, in that darkness, small mammals survived. In burrows, in sheltered places, in overlooked corners of the world, life clung on. When the skies cleared and the forests grew back, those survivors spread into the empty spaces. Within a few million years, mammals had diversified into forms that would eventually lead to us. What looked like devastation was also the beginning of something new. Healing also comes from the Earth's natural systems of balance. Volcanoes release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, warming the planet, but over millions of years, weathering of rocks and the growth of plants pull that carbon back out. Ice sheets advance and retreat in response to orbital cycles, slowly regulating climate over tens of thousands of years. Forests regrow after fires, coral reefs rebuild after bleaching, soils restore themselves when left to rest. These processes don't move on human timescales. they move on planetary ones. From our perspective, the damage can seem permanent. From the Earth's perspective, it is just another cycle of destruction and renewal. Even oceans, which can seem so vulnerable to change, have ways of healing. After periods of anoxia, when waters turned toxic and lifeless, circulation eventually restored oxygen and marine ecosystems flourished again. Coral reefs devastated by warming and acidification can, if conditions stabilise, recover over centuries. Fish populations can rebound if given enough time and space. The resilience is built in, though it often requires patience beyond human imagination. This doesn't mean healing is inevitable. Sometimes the damage is too deep, or the pressures too great. Many species that vanish and never return. Ecosystems collapse and are replaced by different ones, not the same. But the larger system, the biosphere as a whole, has endured. Even the most severe extinctions have not ended life. They have reset it, reshaped it, redirected it. The healing is not about preservation, it is about continuity. For humans, the idea that the Earth heals itself can be difficult to accept. We tend to measure healing in terms of what we want to save, a particular species, a particular landscape, a particular way of life. When those are lost, it feels like failure. But from the Earth's perspective, healing is not about returning to the familiar. It is about finding balance again, even if that balance looks entirely different from what came before. To us that might feel like loss. To the planet it is renewal. Consider the forests of Chernobyl. After the nuclear disaster in 1986, the area was abandoned, contaminated and left to silence. People expected it to remain a wasteland for centuries. And yet, in the absence of human activity, wildlife returned. Wolves, bears, lynxes and countless other species now thrive there, despite the radiation. The ecosystem is not the same as before. It is scarred, altered, strange, but it is alive. The Earth found a way to heal, even in a place where we thought healing was impossible. Another example lies in the oceans near Bikini Atoll, where nuclear tests once blasted entire islands apart. For decades, the area was considered dead. But divers now report coral reefs growing again, fish returning, ecosystems rebuilding. The scars remain, but life adapts. Healing is not about erasing damage, but about moving forward through it. When we widen the view even further, we see that the Earth itself has healed from catastrophes far greater than anything humans have yet caused. The Permian extinction nearly ended life entirely, but ecosystems eventually flourished again. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs seemed like the end, but it set the stage for mammals and eventually humans. Even the most devastating resets have been followed by recovery. Life bends, shifts, and reshapes itself until balance returns. This doesn't mean we should be careless. The Earth will heal, but that doesn't guarantee we will be part of what comes after. Healing is not always gentle, and it doesn't preserve every form of life. It is possible for Earth to heal without us. That is perhaps the hardest truth to face. We are not necessary for the planet's renewal. We are participants, not the foundation. If we push too far, if we trigger a reset, the Earth will eventually find balance again. But we may not be here to see it. At the same time, understanding that the Earth heals itself can bring a strange sense of comfort. It means that even in the face of catastrophe, even in the darkest moments, life endures. It may look different, it may take millions of years, but it continues. The scars become part of the story, the losses part of the foundation for what comes next. Nothing is ever truly final, only transformed. There's also a lesson in humility here. We often think of ourselves as the ones in control, shaping the future of the planet. And in many ways, we do have power. Our industries, our technologies, our choices are reshaping climate and ecosystems. But the deeper truth is that the Earth is larger than us. Its capacity to heal stretches far beyond our timescales. Even if we push it into crisis, it will eventually find a way to reset and renew. The question is not whether the Earth will survive, but whether we will survive alongside it. And perhaps that is the most important part of this reflection. Healing is not about undoing the past, it is about carrying it forward in new forms. The Earth has healed from asteroid impacts, from volcanic winters, from ice ages, from mass extinctions. Each time it has created something new, something unrecognisable compared to what came before. If Earth has already been reset, then healing is the reason we are here at all. Without it, life would have ended long ago. So when we think about the Earth healing itself, we can imagine the forests regrowing after fire, the seas filling again with life after collapse, the skies clearing after darkness. We can imagine the long patience of a planet that measures time in millions of years, not days. And we can remember that healing is not about going back. It is about going forward, carrying scars and losses, but also carrying possibilities. Which brings us naturally to another reflection. If the Earth heals itself after every reset, then what about us? How fragile are the traces we leave behind? If humanity vanished tomorrow, how long would our footprints last before the planet smoothed them over, healed them into silence? What would remain of us in the deep future when the Earth has already moved on to its next balance? When we think about the mark humanity has left on the Earth, it's easy to imagine it as permanent. Our cities, our highways, our satellites circling the planet, these feel monumental, lasting, impossible to erase. We speak of leaving legacies, of building things that will stand the test of time. Yet when you look closer, when you measure not in centuries but in the language of geology, our footprints are far more fragile than we might like to believe. What we call permanent is often only temporary, a brief scratch on the surface of a planet that has been reshaping itself for billions of years. Consider our buildings. Skyscrapers seem indestructible, their steel frames and concrete foundations towering over landscapes. But left alone, without constant maintenance, even the tallest towers would begin to crumble within decades. Water seeps into cracks, freezes, and splits concrete apart. Metal rusts, weakening supports. Plants push their roots into walls. Within a few centuries, most of our cities would collapse into ruins. Within a few thousand years, forests would cover them, rivers would carve through them, and only faint traces would remain. To us, that feels unimaginable. To the Earth, it is simply what always happens. Even our roads, which seem so widespread and enduring, are fragile. Asphalt cracks under heat and cold, soil shifts beneath foundations, invasive plants push through. Without people constantly repairing them, highways would fade back into the landscape within a few hundred years. Archaeologists of the distant future might find faint outlines of grids beneath the soil, but nothing like the vast networks we take for granted today. What about our monuments? The structures we built with permanence in mind. The pyramids of Giza have stood for thousands of years, and they may endure for thousands more, their massive stones resisting erosion longer than most things humans have ever made. Mount Rushmore may hold its shape for hundreds of thousands of years before weathering erases the faces. Yet even these monumental works are not immune. Given enough time, wind, water, and tectonic shifts will wear them down. Nothing we build lasts forever. The Earth always reclaims. Some argue that our most enduring legacy will not be stone or steel, but plastic. Trillions of fragments scattered across land and sea, buried in sediments, washed into rivers, eaten by animals. Plastic breaks down slowly, and many types could linger for hundreds of thousands of years. Future geologists might find layers of it pressed into rocks, a strange marker of our presence. In that sense, the most lasting trace of our civilization may be something we never intended to leave behind. Nuclear waste is another candidate for endurance. Buried deep underground, sealed in containers meant to last for tens of thousands of years, it carries dangers that outlive any language we speak today. We've even struggled with how to mark such sites, knowing that the symbols and warnings we design may not be understood by people or beings living far in the future. If nothing else, it is proof of how fragile communication is across deep time. Our words dissolve far faster than the materials we leave behind, and yet, for all these traces, it's important to remember how much will vanish. Our books will decay. Our digital records stored on fragile drives and servers will corrode or be erased by power loss. Even stone tablets, if not protected, will eventually weather. The vast library of human knowledge, unless carefully preserved, could disappear within millennia. Imagine a future archaeologist trying to reconstruct our world from scattered fragments of plastic, rusted metal, and decayed concrete. What picture would they form of us? What myths would they create to explain what we left behind? The oceans hide another truth. Much of what we've built along coastlines, our ports, our cities, our resorts, sits vulnerable to rising seas. In a few thousand years, many of these places may be underwater, buried in sediment. Just as we speculate about lost cities beneath today's oceans, future generations might speculate about ours. The sea has always been a powerful eraser of memory. What falls beneath its surface often does not return, and yet, even knowing this fragility, there is something strangely beautiful in it. Our impermanence ties us to the same cycles as every other creature. Just as forests grow and burn and grow again, just as rivers carve and shift, so too will our works rise and fall. We are part of the rhythm of the earth, not separate from it. Our footprints may be fragile, but they are real in their moment, and that is enough. Of course, fragility does not mean invisibility. The earth carries memory in its rocks, its ice, its sediments. Future geologists may read our presence in the sudden spike of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, in the layers of plastic embedded in soil, in the bones of animals carrying traces of our influence. They may call this the Anthropocene, the age when humans left a distinct mark on the planet. Even if cities vanish, even if monuments erode, the chemical fingerprints may endure. A thin layer in the rock record marking the time when one species changed the world. And yet, even that record will fade eventually. Tectonic plates will recycle the crust. Mountains will rise and fall. Oceans will shift. The surface of the earth is not permanent. Given tens of millions of years, even our most lasting traces may vanish completely, swallowed by subduction zones or ground into dust. That is the final humbling truth. In the deep future, it may be as though we never existed at all. But perhaps that is not something to fear. Perhaps it is simply the way of things. Just as we wonder about civilizations that might have come before, perhaps future beings will wonder about us, piecing together fragments, imagining stories, inventing legends. Perhaps we too will become a kind of Atlantis, remembered more in myth than in fact. Our fragile footprints will fade, but the curiosity about them may endure. In the end, what matters is not how long our traces last, but what we do with the time we have. The earth does not measure in monuments. It measures in cycles, in resets, in renewal. Our footprints are fragile, but they are also unique. They tell the story of a species that rose, built, dreamed, and imagined permanence even in the face of impermanence. They are part of the rhythm, part of the memory, part of the healing. And from that reflection comes another. If our footprints are fragile, if even our greatest works vanish, then perhaps the real question is not what we leave behind in stone or steel, but what lessons remain. What signs exist that history repeats, that cycles return, that resets are not only possible but inevitable? What warnings are hidden in the patterns we can already see? When people talk about the possibility of history repeating, they usually mean it in the sense of wars and politics, mistakes made by one generation echoing into the next. But when we widen the view to include not just human affairs but the entire planet, the phrase takes on a deeper meaning. The Earth itself repeats. The rhythms of climate, of extinctions, of collapses and renewals, they are not linear, they are cyclical. And when you know what to look for, the the signs that history might repeat are everywhere. The first and most obvious sign is climate. The record of ice cores, sediments and fossils shows us that the Earth has never been stable for long. Ice ages advance and retreat with the rhythm of orbital shifts. Temperatures rise and fall, oceans expand and contract. Even in the relatively short span of human history, we see echoes of this. The Sahara was once green, filled with rivers, lakes, and thriving cultures. Then, over just a few thousand years, it dried into desert. Civilizations that depended on its fertility vanished or moved, leaving behind rock art of animals that no longer live there. That transformation was a reset, and it was not the only one. Across the world, similar shifts have reshaped where humans could live and how they survived. If it happened before, it can happen again. Another sign lies in the cycles of extinction. We know that species vanish at a background rate, slowly and steadily over millions of years. But we also know that this rate spikes during times of crisis, whether caused by asteroids, volcanoes, or rapid climate shifts. Today, scientists warn that the rate of extinction is again far higher than normal, driven not by cosmic impacts but by human activity. Habitat loss, pollution, hunting and warming temperatures are pushing countless species to the edge. If mass extinctions have happened before, triggered by natural events, then what we are seeing now may be the beginning of another. The pattern is repeating, though the cause this time is us. There are also the signs left in human history itself. Civilizations rise, flourish, and collapse with a rhythm that is hard to ignore. The great cities of the Bronze Age crumbled around 1200 BCE, in what is often called the Late Bronze Age collapse. The reasons are still debated: drought, invasion, earthquakes, or perhaps a combination, but the pattern is clear. Complex societies, interconnected by trade and culture, proved vulnerable to disruption. Once the system broke, it took centuries to rebuild. Similar collapses have happened across history: the fall of Rome, the decline of the Maya, the abandonment of Angkor. Each time, people thought their world was permanent, only to see it unravel. If it happened so many times before, why would we believe it cannot happen again? The Earth itself provides another sign through its cycles of catastrophe. Volcanoes still erupt, asteroids still orbit, fault lines still strain beneath the surface. These forces have not gone away just because we built cities and satellites. They remain, waiting, part of the planet's normal rhythm. The question is not whether another eruption or impact will come, but when. History shows us that the Earth does not hesitate to reset, and there is no reason to think it has stopped. Even our technology carries hints of repetition. We think of ourselves as advanced, but what if earlier civilizations also reached levels of sophistication we no longer remember? If sea levels rose, if forests reclaimed cities, if millennia passed, what would remain of us? Very little. We would become another mystery, another legend of a lost age. That possibility, however remote it may seem, is another sign that resets are not unique to the distant past. They can happen to us too. What makes these signs most powerful is how easily we overlook them. We live in short time scales, measuring decades or centuries, not thousands of years. A climate shift that takes a century feels slow to us, but in geological terms it is lightning fast. A species vanishing in a few decades feels like a tragedy, but in the broader record it is just another disappearance in a long line of extinctions. Because our lives are brief, we mistake slow-moving resets for stability. But the signs are there if we step back. We see them in rising seas, swallowing islands, echoing the floods that ended other ages. We see them in wildfires consuming forests, echoing the fiery resets of the past. We see them in extinctions accelerating, echoing the great die-offs recorded in stone. We see them in political collapses, echoing the cycles of empires before us. Each is a reminder that history does not move in a straight line. It bends, it loops, it repeats. This does not mean that every repetition is identical. The Earth does not copy events exactly. Each reset is unique, shaped by its causes and its survivors. But the rhythm is there. Floods and fires, rises and falls, abundance and collapse. The signs tell us not to be surprised when the cycle turns again. They tell us that permanence is the illusion, not the rule. And perhaps the clearest sign of all is our own feeling of unease. We sense, deep down, that the balance is fragile. When we hear of melting glaciers, rising seas, burning forests, collapsing species, we recognise the pattern even if we don't always say it aloud. We know history has reset before. We know it can again. That intuition is itself a sign, a memory carried not in myths alone but in the collective awareness of a species that has lived through smaller resets already. If history repeats, then the real question is not whether it will happen again, but how we will face it. Will we adapt, as other species did after catastrophes, finding ways to survive in the spaces left behind? Or will we cling too tightly to the illusion of permanence, only to be swept away when the cycle turns? The signs are already here. It is only a matter of how we read them, and from this reflection, another path unfolds. If signs point to repetition, then perhaps we should look at what lies hidden beneath the surface, at the possibility that traces of earlier resets, technologies, artifacts, fragments, might already be buried in sand and stone, waiting for us to uncover them. What would it mean if we are not the first to leave behind such traces? What if history has already repeated more than once, and we are simply the latest expression of it? When people think about technology, they usually imagine it as something modern, tied to electricity, machines and circuits. It feels like an invention of our age, the natural outcome of progress building from fire to tools to steam engines to silicon chips. But there is another possibility that lingers in the corners of imagination, whispered about in myths and speculations. What if we are not the first to create technologies that reshaped the world? What if earlier civilizations, long erased by resets, also built things that now lie hidden beneath sand and stone? It may sound like fantasy at first, but consider how fragile our own technology really is. A smartphone packed with more processing power than the computers that once sent rockets to the moon can become useless in a matter of years if its battery dies, if its casing cracks, if its software corrupts. Imagine one buried under soil for a century. Water would seep in, metals would corrode, plastic would weaken. In 1,000 years it would be nothing but fragments. In 10,000, even those fragments might dissolve completely. Now imagine millions of years, the scale at which Earth resets. How much of our age would survive? Perhaps very little. Even sturdier machines would not fare much better. Airplanes, cars, ships, all would rust, rot, and collapse. Within centuries of abandonment, nature would reclaim them. Within millennia, they might be buried or washed away. What would remain after millions of years? Likely only traces, unusual concentrations of metals in the soil, strange chemical signatures, fragments of alloys pressed into rocks. From a geological perspective, most of what we call technology is temporary. If another species were to dig through our layer of history in the far future, they might not find intact machines. They might only see strange anomalies, odd patterns in the record, clues that suggest something unusual once existed here. Which leads to a provocative question. If that is true for us, could it also have been true for others? If another civilization once rose long before ours, advanced enough to leave its mark, would we even know? Or would its machines, its cities, its tools have long since vanished, erased by erosion, swallowed by oceans, buried under volcanic rock? The idea may sound impossible, but the silence of the past is vast. Our record of human history extends back only a few thousand years in detail. Beyond that, evidence grows thin. Beyond tens of thousands, it becomes fragmentary. Beyond hundreds of thousands, almost nothing survives except stone tools and fossils, and beyond a few million, only the hardest rocks carry memory. This is why some scientists have asked whether we might recognize the traces of a past technological civilization not by its artifacts, but by its impact. Did it leave behind a sudden spike of carbon dioxide as we have? Did it scatter plastics, metals, or other unusual compounds across the surface? Did it alter ecosystems in ways detectable millions of years later? In other words, would the signature of technology be chemical and geological, not mechanical? If so, then perhaps the Earth has already carried such signatures before, now blended so deeply into its cycles that we mistake them for natural anomalies. There are hints, strange puzzles in the geological record that fuel such speculation. Layers of unusual isotopes, deposits of metals, odd formations that spark debate. Most of these likely have natural explanations, yet the possibility lingers because we know how incomplete the record is. We know how easily resets erase detail, and we know how little of the Earth has been explored in the kind of depth needed to find such traces. Even within known history, discoveries sometimes surprise us. Ancient engineers built mechanisms far more advanced than once believed possible. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, is a complex device of gears used to track celestial movements, more sophisticated than anything thought to exist at the time. Roman concrete has survived seawater for 2,000 years, and may be stronger than many modern mixes. The aqueducts, pyramids, and road systems of earlier civilizations show levels of planning and precision that still impress us today. These are not the same as our technologies, but they remind us that innovation has always been part of humanity, and that we often underestimate what earlier cultures could achieve. Now imagine that stretched back much further. What if, tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, there were cultures that reached levels of complexity we cannot imagine, only to vanish in a reset? We might never know for certain. The sands bury, the stones erode, the seas rise. Time smooths everything over. What remains may be only fragments, too ambiguous to prove. Even myths sometimes seem to hint at this possibility. Stories of gods descending with knowledge, of golden ages when humanity lived with powers now forgotten, of tools that controlled the elements or harnessed energies beyond fire and wind. Taken literally, they may not be accurate, but as echoes, as memories transformed into myth, they carry a haunting suggestion. Perhaps people before us built things that later generations could not understand, reducing them to stories of magic and divinity. Technology forgotten can look like sorcery. To a world reset, it can look like legend. If we think honestly about how little of our own age might survive deep time, the idea becomes less outlandish. In millions of years, if another species were to rise and dig into the Earth, they might find a thin layer filled with plastic particles, radioactive isotopes from our nuclear experiments, traces of metals distributed oddly across soils. They might conclude that something unusual once lived here, something capable of altering the planet in ways no natural process could explain. But would they find intact cities? Would they find machines? Almost certainly not. Our greatest skyscrapers would be gone, our satellites long fallen from orbit and burned in the atmosphere, our knowledge erased unless copied onto materials far more durable than paper, silicon, or plastic. We would be a mystery, just as any predecessors would be to us. The thought that technology itself could be buried, erased, and forgotten is unsettling, but it is also a reminder of perspective. What feels monumental to us is fleeting to the Earth. Our machines are sparks against a backdrop of billions of years. If there were others before us, their sparks may have flared and gone out too, leaving behind only faint traces. And if the Earth resets again, this same fate may await us. There is also something strangely humbling in this possibility. We often think of ourselves as unique, the first and only to rise so high. But perhaps uniqueness is an illusion. Perhaps the Earth has hosted intelligence before, has seen technology rise and fall more than once. If so, then we are not the pinnacle, only another expression in a long cycle of resets. We may never know for certain, but the possibility keeps us aware of how fragile our place truly is, and even if no other technological civilizations existed before us, the silence of the record still reminds us that much of our own story may one day be invisible. We like to imagine future beings walking through the ruins of our cities, marvelling at our monuments. But far more likely they will see only the faintest chemical clues, the subtle scars of our presence. To them, we may be as mysterious as Atlantis is to us. In the end, technology buried beneath sand and stone is not just a question of archaeology, it is a question of perspective. It asks us to consider how fleeting our works are, how easily resets erase, and how uncertain the record of the past truly is. It asks us to recognise that we live not outside of time, but within its cycles, subject to the same forgetting that has erased so much before us. And it leads naturally to the next reflection. If resets and erasures are not limited to Earth alone, if they happen here again and again, then perhaps they happen elsewhere as well. What if this rhythm of rise and fall, of technology remembered and forgotten, is not unique to our world but part of a cosmic pattern? When we talk about resets, it's easy to keep our gaze fixed on Earth. After all, this is the world we know, the ground beneath our feet, the place where our stories have unfolded. But if we lift our eyes to the night sky, if we consider the billions of stars scattered across the cosmos, a new thought arises. What if resets are not just an earthly rhythm but a cosmic one? What if the cycle of rise and fall, creation and destruction happens not just here but everywhere? The universe, after all, is not a gentle place. It is vast, beautiful, but also violent. And within its violence, resets are written into its very fabric. Take stars, for instance. Every star is both a creator and a destroyer. A star forms from collapsing clouds of gas, igniting fusion that burns for millions or billions of years. Around it, planets may form, life may emerge, civilizations may rise. But eventually the star dies. Some fade quietly into white dwarfs, cooling embers in the dark. Others collapse violently, exploding as supernovae that outshine entire galaxies. These explosions are catastrophes on unimaginable scales, capable of sterilizing planets, wiping away life in an instant. But they are also beginnings. The heavy elements forged in these deaths, iron, gold, uranium, scatter into space, seeding new stars, new planets, new chances for life. In the cosmos, every reset is also a renewal. Even galaxies carry this rhythm. Collisions between them tear apart stars and worlds, reshaping structures across millions of light years. Black holes at their centres flare with energy, consuming matter and blasting radiation that can strip atmospheres from nearby planets. On scales so vast we can barely comprehend them, resets are constant. The universe is always reshuffling, always renewing. It is not a steady march toward permanence, but a cycle of upheaval and creation. If that is true on such scales, then why would intelligent life be immune? If civilizations can rise here on Earth only to be erased by floods, fires, or impacts, why couldn't the same happen elsewhere? Perhaps across the galaxy, civilizations bloom like sparks, burning bright for a time before resets extinguish them. Some may vanish from their own mistakes, exhausting their resources or destabilizing their worlds. Others may fall victim to cosmic events, asteroids, supernova, gamma-ray bursts. Each time a world is reset, and whatever life comes after begins again, unaware of what was lost. This idea may even explain one of the deepest puzzles in astronomy, the Fermi paradox. If the galaxy is filled with stars many older than our own, and if planets are common, then where is everyone? Why don't we see evidence of civilization scattered across the cosmos? One possible answer is that resets are universal. Life may rise often, but it may also fall often. Civilizations may bloom, but they may rarely survive long enough to spread across the stars. Their footprints, like ours, may be fragile, erased before they can endure. It is a sobering thought, but also a humbling one. We often imagine ourselves as unique, the first to rise, the first to dream of other worlds. But perhaps we're not alone in that cycle. Perhaps countless civilizations have risen before us, scattered across the galaxy, each one believing itself to be permanent, each one eventually reset. If so, then we are part of a rhythm larger than Earth, larger than humanity, larger even than life itself. And yet, even in that thought, there is wonder. Because if resets are universal, so too is renewal. For every star that dies, another is born. For every planet sterilized by fire or radiation, another emerges in a quieter corner of the galaxy. For every civilization erased, the possibility of another waits. The cosmos is not static. It is always resetting, always renewing. Life may be fragile, but it is also resilient, seeded again and again by the very forces that destroy it. Some scientists even wonder if traces of past civilizations might already exist in our own solar system. Not on Earth, where erosion and plate tectonics erase so much, but on places like the Moon or Mars, where surfaces change more slowly. If an earlier civilization, human or otherwise, left technology there millions of years ago, would we recognize it? Or would time and dust have hidden it so completely that we would walk past without noticing? The silence of space may not mean absence. It may mean erasure, the same kind of forgetting that Earth imposes on its own history. When we think of the cosmos in this way, resets become less frightening and more inevitable. They are part of the design. Without them, stars would not spread their elements. Without them, planets would not form. Without them, life itself would not exist. Just as Earth's resets made space for new species, the universe's resets make space for new worlds. We are the children of those resets, our bodies made of atoms forged in the deaths of ancient stars. Every breath we take is proof that the cycle works, that endings lead to beginnings, and if that is true, then our own fragility is not a flaw, but a reflection of the cosmos itself. We are temporary, but so is everything. We are vulnerable to resets, but so is the universe. The permanence we crave does not exist, not in stars, not in galaxies, not in civilizations. What exists is rhythm, birth, growth, collapse, renewal. To live is to be part of that rhythm, whether on Earth or across the galaxy. It may be that one day we will face a cosmic reset ourselves, a nearby supernova, a burst of radiation, an asteroid from deep space. Or it may be that we create our own through choices that destabilize our world. Either way, we are not separate from the cosmos. We are subject to its cycles, just as we are subject to Earth's. The only difference is scale. The cosmic perspective reminds us that resets are not unique to us. They are woven into the very fabric of existence. And in that vastness, there is one more thought. If resets are universal, then so is resilience. Life rises again, not always in the same place, not always in the same form, but always somewhere. Stars die, but new stars are born. Civilizations fall, but others may rise in distant skies. The cosmos does not grieve its resets. It continues. And in that continuation lies the deepest comfort of all. Nothing is truly final. Not here, not anywhere. Which naturally leads us toward another reflection. If the universe itself repeats, if resets are everywhere, then memory becomes fragile not just for us but for all beings. The question is not only whether civilizations rise and fall, but whether their stories survive. How much can memory endure when even the stars themselves are impermanent? If resets erase civilizations, landscapes, even species, then what truly endures? More often than not, it is memory. But memory too is fragile. It is carried in stories, passed from one generation to another, reshaped each time, softened or hardened by the needs of the teller. And while stone can weather and wood can rot, memory can dissolve even faster. A single forgotten word, a single lost language, a single silence can erase centuries of understanding. When we think about the fragility of memory and story, we begin to understand why so much of the past feels like a mystery, and why so much of what we know now may one day vanish into silence. Even today, in a world saturated with recordings, archives and data, memory is fragile. Hard drives fail, servers crash, files are corrupted or deleted, languages die with their last speakers, libraries burn, and with them centuries of knowledge. If this is true in an age when we devote vast effort to preserving information, imagine how much more fragile memory was before writing. Oral traditions carried truths across generations, but always imperfectly, always shaped by the teller. Stories changed, metaphors replaced details, and what began as history became myth. Floods, fires, and resets were remembered not in precise measurements, but in symbols. The wrath of gods, the cleansing of the world, the rebirth of life. Take the flood myths that appear across so many cultures. Were they literal accounts of global catastrophes, or memories of regional disasters magnified by retelling? Perhaps both. What matters is that memory of devastation endured, reshaped into story. The details blurred, but the warning remained. Water rises, worlds drown, survival requires adaptation. The fragility of memory transforms fact into fable, but the essence often survives. The same is true of civilizations that vanished. The Maya built vast cities filled with temples, pyramids, and inscriptions. When their civilization declined, much of their knowledge was lost. Spanish conquest destroyed countless texts, leaving only fragments. For centuries, scholars struggled to understand their writing, their mathematics, their astronomy. Only in recent times have we begun to recover some of it. Yet how much is gone forever, erased not by time alone, but by violence and neglect? Memory is fragile not only because it fades, but because it can be deliberately erased. Think also of languages. Each one carries unique ways of understanding the world, unique stories, unique knowledge. When a language dies, all of that vanishes unless carefully preserved. Thousands of languages have already disappeared, and with them, entire ways of seeing reality. It is as if each lost language is a small reset, wiping out a particular strand of human memory. The earth is filled with silences where voices once spoke, and each silence is a reminder of how easily memory dissolves. Even written records which feel permanent are not. Clay tablets can break, scrolls decay, ink fades, paper burns. Digital records, often thought indestructible, are in many ways more fragile than stone. Without power, without functioning machines to read them, they are useless. Archaeologists in the far future might find hard drives by the millions, but unless they also find the knowledge to read them, they will be meaningless blocks of plastic and metal. Memory, no matter how carefully stored, is always vulnerable to reset. And so we find ourselves in a paradox. We know memory is fragile, yet we build our lives around it. We trust it to connect us to the past, to carry lessons forward, to shape our identities. Nations are built on stories of origin. Families are held together by shared memory. Individuals define themselves through recollections of childhood, of choices, of experiences. Take memory away, and identity itself dissolves. Yet memory is the one thing the earth erases most easily. This fragility extends even to the natural world. Fossils are rare because most creatures decay completely without leaving a trace. Of the countless species that have lived, only a tiny fraction are remembered in stone. The rest vanish into silence, their stories untold. Even the record we do have is patchy, filled with gaps, distortions, accidents of preservation. The earth remembers imperfectly. It too is subject to the fragility of memory. Perhaps this is why humans tell stories at all, to fight against forgetting, to create echoes that might endure. Stories do not need to be literal to carry truth. They survive because they resonate, because they are retold, because they matter to those who hear them. Myths may not preserve exact details, but they preserve patterns, cycles of rise and fall, warnings about hubris, lessons about survival. In this way, even fragile memory carries strength. It endures not by precision, but by persistence, yet even persistence has limits. Consider how many ancient stories we have already lost. Think of the countless cultures that left no written records, their voices carried only in oral traditions that eventually fell silent. Each one carried knowledge, wisdom, memory of resets and survival. Each one is gone. The silence is immense. What we call history is only a fragment of what once existed, and much of what is missing was erased not by malice but by the simple fragility of memory itself. This fragility matters because it shapes how we understand ourselves. If we have already been reset, if civilizations before us rose and fell, then much of their memory has vanished. We see only fragments, myths of floods, ruins in jungles, scattered artifacts. We cannot know the full story because the story no longer exists. It has been dissolved by time, by erasure, by silence. And if we vanish, the same will happen to us. Our books, our digital files, our stories will fade. Perhaps a few fragments will endure. Perhaps myths will carry echoes, but the details will dissolve. Memory will prove fragile once again. Yet even within that fragility, there is a strange resilience. Memory may not endure in detail, but it endures in rhythm. The stories of floods, fires, and resets repeat across cultures, across ages. The details shift, but the patterns remain. Perhaps this is the deeper way memory works, not by preserving every fact, but by carrying forward the essence, that nothing is permanent, that cycles return, that survival requires humility and adaptation. Fragile in detail, strong in theme. That may be why we're still telling these stories now. And so, when we think about resets, we must also think about memory. Not just what is lost, but what is carried forward, reshaped into myth, into story, into warning. We must accept that forgetting is inevitable, but that meaning can survive even through forgetting. The fragility of memory is real, but so is its persistence in the patterns it preserves. From this reflection, another question arises. If memory is fragile, then perhaps the fossils themselves, the physical remains of life, carry truths that stories cannot. What is written in bone and stone may endure longer than what is written in words, and yet even there, gaps remain, silences that speak as loudly as the fossils themselves. What the fossils don't tell us may be as important as what they do. When we imagine the past, we often picture fossils as if they were a complete record, a faithful archive of everything that once lived. Rows of dinosaur skeletons in museums give the impression that we know exactly what the world looked like millions of years ago, as though every species left behind its story written in stone. But fossils are not a complete history. They are fragments, lucky accidents of preservation, scattered pieces of a vast puzzle with most of the pieces missing. What fossils don't tell us is just as important as what they do. And it is within those silences, those missing chapters, that much of the mystery of Earth's resets lingers. The first thing to understand is how unlikely fossilization really is. For an organism to become a fossil, a very specific chain of events must occur. It must die in the right place, quickly buried by sediment before scavengers, or weather destroy it. Soft tissues usually decay almost immediately, leaving only bones, shells, or hard parts behind. Even those are often crushed, dissolved, or scattered before they can be preserved. Then, over millions of years, the surrounding rock must remain stable enough to protect the remains until erosion or excavation brings them to light. When you consider how fragile this process is, it's astonishing we have any fossils at all. This means that the fossil record is profoundly biased. Creatures with hard shells or bones are more likely to be preserved than those made of softer tissues. Animals that lived near water or in sediment-rich environments stand a better chance of fossilization than those in mountains or forests. Small creatures often vanish without a trace, while large ones sometimes leave behind partial skeletons. Even entire ecosystems can disappear from the record if conditions were not right. What fossils don't tell us is how much has been erased by chance alone. For example, think of insects. They make up the majority of animal species on Earth today, and they likely did in the past as well. But their delicate bodies rarely fossilize. We know they were present, we find occasional impressions in amber or stone, but the true diversity of their ancient forms is largely lost. What we see in the fossil record is only a sliver, an outline, not the full picture. If something as abundant as insects leaves so little behind, imagine how much else has vanished without a trace. Even when fossils do survive, they are incomplete storytellers. A skeleton can tell us about bones, about size and structure, but it often says little about behaviour. We can reconstruct the muscles and posture of a dinosaur, but can we know its colour, its mating rituals, its calls, its social structures? Fossils rarely capture those details. Feathers and pigments are sometimes preserved in exceptional cases, but most of the time we are left guessing. Did some dinosaurs sing? Did they dance to attract mates? Did they live in complex societies or were they solitary? The fossils are silent. The same silence surrounds many extinctions. We know that species vanished in mass die-offs, but we don't always know why. The fossil record shows absence but not always cause. Did a particular extinction come from climate change, disease, competition, or catastrophe? Sometimes we can infer, but often the answer remains hidden. Fossils tell us that life ended, but not always how. The story of resets is written in gaps as much as in bones. Even when fossils do speak, their words can be misleading. Bones can shift after burial, crushed by pressure or moved by water. Skeletons can be reconstructed incorrectly, leading to false impressions of how a creature looked or moved. Early reconstructions of dinosaurs often portrayed them as sluggish, tail-dragging reptiles, when in reality many were active, agile, even bird-like. The fossils were there, but the interpretation was shaped by our own assumptions. What fossils don't tell us is how easily our imagination fills in the blanks, sometimes wrongly. There are also entire chapters of life missing. The fossil record stretches back billions of years, but the earliest forms of life, tiny microbes, rarely fossilized. We infer their presence from chemical signatures, from stromatolites, from indirect evidence. But the details of those early worlds remain mysterious. We don't know exactly how life began, what forms it first took, or how quickly it diversified. The fossils don't tell us because they couldn't. The evidence dissolved before it could be preserved. And if that is true for the deep past, it raises a question about more recent possibilities. If an earlier civilization had risen before us, perhaps tens of millions of years ago, what traces would remain? Would fossils tell us? Probably not. Cities built of metal and concrete might vanish in far less time than it takes to fossilize. Machines and tools would decay before they could be buried. Even bones of a technological species might dissolve or be scattered. The silence of the fossil record does not prove absence, it only proves fragility. What fossils don't tell us is how much could have existed outside their narrow window of preservation. This fragility also explains why so many mysteries remain unsolved. The sudden disappearance of the dinosaurs, the cause of the Permian extinction, the pace of human evolution, all are subjects where fossils provide pieces but not full answers. We piece together patterns, but the silences are always there. Resets are written not only in the bones we find, but in the absences we cannot explain. Even within human history, fossils leave much untold. Early humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years before writing. Most of their tools were made of wood or fibres that decayed. What remains are mostly stone tools and a few bones. From these, we try to reconstruct entire lives, entire cultures. But what did they sing? What stories did they tell? What beliefs guided them? The fossils don't tell us. The silence is vast and it humbles us. In the end, fossils remind us that memory is always incomplete. They are extraordinary gifts, fragments of deep time, but they are not a full archive. They tell us enough to glimpse patterns, enough to know that resets have shaped the Earth again and again. But they do not tell us everything. They leave space for wonder, for imagination, for caution. They remind us that much of the past has already been erased, and that much of our own story may one day vanish as well. And from this reflection comes another thought. If fossils are incomplete, if they leave silences as large as the records they preserve, then perhaps we ourselves are the result of such a silence. Perhaps we are survivors of a forgotten reset, a species carrying forward not just our own history, but the legacy of worlds erased before us. It is a question that lingers quietly in the background of all these reflections. If resets have happened again and again across Earth's long history, wiping away species, civilizations, entire landscapes, then how certain can we be that we are the first to rise as far as we have? Could it be that we are not the pioneers we imagine ourselves to be, but the inheritors of a world that has already been reset, carrying forward without knowing it the faint echoes of something erased? Could we, in other words, be the survivors of a forgotten reset? To entertain the question, we first need to think about how much of the past has already been lost. We often measure history in terms of written records, but writing itself only goes back a few thousand years. That is a thin slice of time compared to the hundreds of thousands of years modern humans have existed, and thinner still compared to the millions of years hominins have walked the earth. Before writing, there were oral traditions, and before those, silence. The deeper you go into time, the less detail survives. Beyond a certain point, fossils and fragments are all we have, and even those are scarce. If anything of great complexity existed before us, most of it would already be erased. What survives is not necessarily representative of what once was. As we've seen, fossils are rare and biased. Archaeological sites vanish under floods, under shifting soil, under volcanic ash. Entire coastlines where early civilizations might have lived are now submerged by rising seas. The deeper we look, the more gaps we find. These gaps are not just spaces between data points, they are silences large enough to conceal entire worlds. And in those silences lies the possibility that we are not the first. There are small hints, intriguing puzzles, though none definitive. Ancient structures whose precision seems advanced for their time. Stories of lost continents, golden ages, vanished peoples, artifacts that seem out of place, their purpose unclear. Most of these can be explained with patience and context, but they leave just enough room for speculation. What if some are faint traces distorted by time, of a world reset so completely that almost nothing remains? If we imagine such a reset, we can picture survivors scattered and diminished, knowledge reduced to fragments. A global catastrophe could erase cities, networks, and technologies in a matter of decades. Survivors would pass on stories of what came before, but without the infrastructure to maintain complexity, those stories would gradually transform into myth. Memories of advanced tools might become tales of magic. Memories of vast cities might become stories of shining kingdoms swallowed by the sea. Within a few generations, the details would dissolve, and all that would remain would be legend. In that sense, we may already carry the memories of forgotten resets without realizing it. Even in our own age, we can see how fragile continuity is. Imagine if electricity disappeared tomorrow, not just in one place, but everywhere. How long could we maintain the knowledge encoded in servers, in machines, in digital archives? Within a few decades, much of it would be inaccessible. Within centuries, most of it would be gone. Books would decay, machines would rust, languages would shift. Survivors would remember pieces but not the whole. If this can happen to us, why could it not have happened before? There is also the question of genetics. Our DNA carries traces of survival, evidence that humanity passed through bottlenecks where only small populations endured. One of the most famous examples is the Toba eruption about 74,000 years ago, when a supervolcano nearly drove humanity to extinction. Some estimates suggest our species may have been reduced to just a few thousand individuals. We survived, but barely. In a different world, the reset might have erased us completely. The fact that we endured does not mean others always did. Perhaps other intelligent branches rose and fell, their genes absorbed or erased by resets we no longer remember. If that thought feels unsettling, it is because it destabilizes our sense of uniqueness. We like to imagine ourselves as special, as the culmination of history. But perhaps we are just one in a line, one more attempt by Earth to grow something complex, fragile, and imaginative. If earlier civilizations did rise, we may never know their details. Their traces would be buried, their memory dissolved. We would live unaware, carrying on as if we were the first. That possibility humbles us. It reminds us that permanence is not guaranteed, and that forgetting is the rule, not the exception. And yet, even if we are survivors of a forgotten reset, there is something hopeful in it too. Survival means continuity. Even if worlds ended, something endured. Genes, tools, stories, fragments. We are here because survival happened, even if the details were erased. That means resilience is part of our inheritance. Whatever resets came before, we are living proof that life can begin again, that memory, though fragile, can still leave echoes strong enough to carry forward. This perspective also reshapes how we think about our present. If resets are normal, if forgetting is inevitable, then what matters is not clinging to permanence, but finding ways to adapt, to pass forward what matters most. We cannot prevent the Earth from changing, but we can shape how we respond. If we see ourselves as potential survivors rather than untouchable rulers, we prepare differently. We cultivate humility, resilience, awareness. We focus not on preserving everything exactly as it is, but on ensuring that something endures. Of course, we may never have proof of forgotten resets beyond myth and speculation. The Earth is skilled at erasure. Time smooths over scars until only faint hints remain. But the very possibility is enough to change how we think. It reminds us that survival is not about permanence, but about continuity, not about avoiding change, but about living through it. And if we are survivors already, then we know it can be done again. The question that follows is simple but profound. If survival is possible after resets, what can we learn from nature itself? What lessons are written in the resilience of forests, of oceans, of species that endure even after catastrophe? If we listen closely, perhaps we can find guidance for how to survive the next reset, whether it comes from the Earth, from the cosmos, or from our own hands. When we talk about resets, it's easy to focus on collapse, on what is lost when the Earth changes suddenly or violently. But every reset, no matter how severe, leaves survivors. Species endure, ecosystems rebuild, and life continues in new forms. This persistence is not random. It follows patterns shaped by resilience, by the ability to adapt, to bend without breaking. If we want to understand how to survive resets, we need only look at nature itself. Its resilience holds lessons that have carried life through billions of years of upheaval, lessons that may guide us if we ever face resets of our own. The first lesson is diversity. Life does not put all its hope in one form. Species multiply into countless variations, filling every niche, exploring every possibility. When catastrophe comes, many may vanish, but some will always be suited to whatever conditions follow. After the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs, it was not the largest or most dominant creatures that survived. It was the small, the adaptable, the overlooked. Mammals in burrows, birds able to scavenge, reptiles that needed little to survive. Diversity meant that even when most were lost, enough endured to rebuild the world. For us, the lesson is clear. Resilience depends on variety, not uniformity. Systems that are too centralized, too dependent on one resource, one culture, or one technology are fragile. Systems with diversity of food sources, energy, languages, ideas have a better chance of enduring. Another lesson is adaptability. Species that survive are those that can adjust quickly to change. Some bacteria thrive in boiling vents, others in freezing ice. Some plants can endure drought, others flooding. The more flexible the form, the more likely it is to survive resets. Humanity itself is a testament to adaptability. We live in deserts and tundras, forests and grasslands. We eat a staggering range of foods, wear countless kinds of clothing, build endless types of shelter. Our flexibility has carried us through ice ages, droughts and disasters. But adaptability is not only biological, it is cultural too. Societies that adapt to change endure. Those that cling rigidly to the past often collapse. The lesson here is humility, the willingness to change when the world demands it. Resilience also lies in cooperation. In nature, survival often depends not on isolation but on networks. Coral reefs are ecosystems where countless species depend on each other. Forests thrive because trees share nutrients through underground fungal networks. Even predators and prey are bound in cycles that sustain balance. When catastrophe strikes, these networks can provide stability, allowing species to endure where they might otherwise fail. For humans, this means that resilience is not just about individuals or even nations, but about cooperation across boundaries. A connected system is stronger than a fractured one. The lesson is that we survive together, or not at all. Redundancy is another principle. In ecosystems, multiple species often perform similar roles. If one disappears, another can fill the gap. This prevents collapse from spreading too far. In our own systems, redundancy often feels inefficient. Extra resources, duplicate networks, backup plans. But in the face of resets, redundancy can mean survival. Multiple ways of generating food, multiple forms of knowledge, multiple centers of culture and technology. Resilience means planning for failure, not just success. Nature teaches us that backups are not luxuries, they are necessities. There is also the lesson of scale. In nature, resilience is often strongest at small scales. A single tree may fall in a storm, but the forest survives. A pond may dry, but wetlands elsewhere endure. Local collapses do not always become global. Humanity sometimes forgets this, building systems so vast and interconnected that failure in one place cascades everywhere. The financial system, the power grid, the internet, all are vulnerable because they lack local resilience. Nature suggests another way, decentralized systems that can fail in parts without collapsing as a whole. Resilience grows from the ability to absorb shocks at small scales. Patience is another key. After catastrophe, nature rebuilds slowly. Forests may take centuries to return after fire. Coral reefs may take millennia after bleaching. The Earth does not rush. It allows balance to re-emerge over time. Humanity, in contrast, often expects instant recovery, instant solutions. But resets cannot be reversed in days or years. They require long-term thinking, the kind of patience that looks beyond lifetimes. The lesson is that resilience is not about speed, but about endurance, about the willingness to persist through long periods of hardship until renewal comes. We can also learn from nature's use of memory. Though ecosystems change, they often carry forward fragments of what came before. Seeds survive in soil, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Microbes endure in extreme environments, ready to expand when conditions shift. Genetic diversity acts as a library of possibilities, ensuring that even after collapse, options remain for adaptation. Humans too must think of resilience as a kind of memory, a way of preserving knowledge, skills and traditions that may be needed again. Even if technologies fade, even if systems collapse, the memory of how to farm, how to build, how to heal must survive somewhere. Memory is resilience, but only if it is carried forward. Another lesson lies in acceptance. In nature, death and collapse are not failures, they are part of the cycle. A fallen tree nourishes the forest floor, a predator culls the weak, strengthening the herd. Fires release seeds that only germinate in heat. What looks like destruction is often transformation. Humans resist this truth, seeking permanence, fighting change at all costs. But resilience means recognizing that collapse is not the end, but part of renewal. If we can shift our perspective from loss to transformation, we may find strength where we once saw only despair. Finally, nature teaches resilience through humility. Life does not seek to control the planet, it adapts to it. Species flourish when they find balance within ecosystems, not when they dominate them. Collapse often comes when balance is lost, when one form grows unchecked at the expense of others. Humanity's dominance is extraordinary, but it is also dangerous. If we push too far, we may trigger resets that erase us. The lesson is that survival lies not in control but in balance, in learning to live as part of the system rather than above it. When we gather all these lessons together, diversity, adaptability, cooperation, redundancy, scale, patience, memory, acceptance, humility, we see a blueprint for survival that has carried life through every reset so far. It does not guarantee safety. Many species still vanish. Many ecosystems collapse. But enough endure to begin again. The blueprint is not perfection, but resilience. And if we are wise, we will carry these lessons forward. Because the question is not whether another reset will come. The Earth has never stopped resetting, and neither has the cosmos. The question is whether we will endure alongside it. If we can learn from nature, if we can build resilience into our societies as deeply as nature builds it into ecosystems, then perhaps we too can survive the next reset. And from this reflection, the thought arises that the next reset may not come from nature alone. It may come from us, from our choices, from our technologies, from the pressures we place on the Earth, which means the resilience we need may not be only biological or cultural. It may be existential, a choice between collapse and transformation. When we think about the next reset, we often imagine it as something distant, something that belongs to geological timescales or cosmic forces far beyond our control. Yet the unsettling truth is that resets are not only possible in the future, they are inevitable, and the question is not whether but how and when. Will the next reset come from us, the species that has reshaped the planet so quickly, or will it come from forces larger than us, the cosmic rhythms that have ended worlds before, human or cosmic? The answer may not be either or, it may be both. On the human side, the possibilities are many, and most of them come from our own success. We have learned to harness energy, to build technologies, to alter landscapes on a scale no other species has managed. But the power carries risks. Climate change is one of the clearest. By burning fossil fuels and releasing vast amounts of carbon dioxide, we have shifted the atmosphere in just a few centuries, faster than many natural processes can balance. Ice melts, seas rise, storms intensify, species vanish as habitats collapse. It is not hard to imagine this as the beginning of a reset, one driven not by asteroids or volcanoes, but by human hands. The Earth will heal eventually, as it always does, but whether we are part of that healed world is uncertain. Nuclear war is another possibility. Since the mid-20th century, we have carried the ability to end civilization in hours. A large-scale exchange could darken skies with soot, cool the planet for years, disrupt agriculture and collapse societies. The technology that gives us energy and deterrence also gives us the potential to erase ourselves. It would not be the end of the Earth, but it could be a reset for humanity, a sudden fracture in our continuity. Even technologies meant to help us carry risks of unintended resets. Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, geoengineering, each offers benefits, but each also carries unknown dangers. A miscalculation, an accident, or even deliberate misuse could unleash consequences we cannot control. We often think of progress as linear, but progress also increases the range of mistakes we can make. Our future may hinge not only on what we build, but on how carefully we use it. Then there are the quieter risks, the ones that don't arrive with fire or explosion, but with slow unravelling. Soil erosion, freshwater depletion, loss of biodiversity. These are resets that creep in gradually, eroding the foundation of civilization until collapse comes not with a bang, but with a whisper. They are easy to ignore because they do not strike suddenly, but in their slow persistence, they may be just as powerful. And yet, beyond all our human risks, the cosmos waits. Earth has always been subject to forces larger than itself. Asteroids continue to circle the sun, any one of which could strike with devastating impact. We know this because it has happened before. The one that ended the age of dinosaurs was not the first, and it will not be the last. We can track many, but not all. The skies hold surprises, and the possibility of a cosmic reset remains. Supervolcanoes are another threat, though technically earthbound rather than cosmic. They erupt rarely, but when they do, the consequences are global. Ash blocks sunlight, crops fail, ecosystems collapse. The Toba eruption nearly ended humanity before we began. Yellowstone, Campi Flegrei, Taupo, all are reminders that beneath our feet, forces wait that could reset the world again. Beyond Earth, the galaxy itself carries risks. A nearby supernova could flood our planet with radiation, stripping away ozone, damaging life at the genetic level. A gamma-ray burst, rare but unimaginably powerful, could sterilize entire regions of a galaxy. We have no control over these events, no defense, no warning beyond observation. They are reminders of our fragility in a universe where energy is both creator and destroyer. When we weigh human and cosmic risks, what emerges is not opposition, but convergence. Human risks unfold quickly because we amplify change through technology. Cosmic risks unfold slowly, unpredictably, but with far greater force. Together they remind us that resets can come from anywhere, at any time, and that permanence is not promised. The question is how we respond to this knowledge. Do we deny it, assuming our present stability will last forever? Or do we accept it, preparing for the possibility that everything could change? Resilience, as we have seen, lies in acceptance, adaptability, and memory. If we prepare, we may endure. If we ignore, we may be swept away. It is worth remembering that resets, though destructive, are not always absolute. After catastrophe, survivors remain. After extinction, life continues in new forms. If the next reset is human-driven, perhaps through climate change or conflict, there may still be survivors, scattered but enduring. If the next reset is cosmic, perhaps through asteroid or supernova, life may survive in hidden corners, in oceans, in caves, in deep-sea vents. The Earth has been scarred before, and yet it always heals. The question is not whether the planet continues, but whether we continue with it. There is also the possibility that the next reset will be neither purely human nor purely cosmic, but a combination. Imagine a weakened world from climate stress struck by a volcanic eruption. Imagine a civilization destabilized by conflict hit by an asteroid. Resets do not need to be singular. They can overlap, compounding their effects. History shows that collapses often come not from one event alone, but from the convergence of many. Fragility accumulates until the system breaks, and yet there is another way to think about resets, not only as threats, but as opportunities. If a reset comes, it forces change, forces adaptation, forces us to rethink who we are and how we live. Humanity has been shaped by hardship before, by ice ages and droughts and collapses. Each time, survivors carried forward, reshaped, renewed. The next reset, whatever its source, may be another such turning point, not an end, but a transformation. This perspective does not make resets less dangerous, but it makes them less final. The universe itself is built on cycles of creation and destruction. Stars die, galaxies collide, planets are sterilized. And yet, out of that violence, new stars are born, new planets form, life arises again. If the cosmos itself endures resets, then so can we. The question is whether we learn the lessons of resilience in time. Which brings us to reflection. If resets are certain, human or cosmic, then our real task is not to stop them, but to live with them, to prepare for them, to carry memory through them. The challenge is not to build permanence, but to build continuity. And perhaps the first step in that is simply to accept our fragility, to understand how easily our footprints can fade, and to see resets not as endings but as part of the story. And from this acceptance, another thought emerges. If the next reset is inevitable, then every moment before it is a kind of gift. Every sunrise, every voice, every story is part of a fragile continuity that could be broken tomorrow or endure for millennia. That fragility gives it weight. That impermanence gives it meaning, which leads us toward the closing reflection, that every reset is also a beginning, and that within every moment lies the chance for a new dawn. When you step back and look at everything we've explored, the myths of lost worlds, the cycles of ice and fire, the fragility of memory, the resilience of life, you start to see resets not as interruptions in history, but as the rhythm of the planet and the cosmos. They are woven into the story of Earth and written into the fabric of the universe itself. And in that recognition, something shifts. Resets stop being only about fear or loss. They become reminders that life continues, that renewal follows collapse, and that every ending is in some way a beginning. If Earth has already been reset, then we are not standing on solid ground as much as we're walking across the surface of a story that has been rewritten many times before. Our continents were shaped by glaciers and volcanoes. Our oceans remember floods and impacts. Our species carries in its DNA the memory of bottlenecks, near extinctions, and survival against odds. We are here because others endured before us. We are not the first to face uncertainty, and we will not be the last. This alone is both humbling and empowering. To live with resets is to live with impermanence. Nothing we build lasts forever. Cities crumble, languages fade, knowledge dissolves. The pyramids will one day be gone. The great libraries of our time will turn to dust. Even the stories we tell tonight may be forgotten. At first, this might feel like despair, but in another sense, it is a call to presence. If everything is temporary, then everything is precious. Every moment becomes a dawn in itself, a brief chance to exist before time erases the trace. Impermanence is not just a threat. It is also the reason each moment matters. When we recognize this, we stop chasing permanence and start valuing continuity. Continuity is not about keeping everything the same. It is about carrying forward what matters most through change. Nature shows us this lesson again and again. After fire, forests regrow, not identical to what they were, but alive. After extinction, life diversifies, not in the same forms, but in new ones. Continuity is not sameness. It is survival, transformation, renewal. And for us, continuity means carrying forward memory, knowledge, and the capacity to adapt, even when everything else shifts around us. This way of seeing resets also changes how we think about our role. Humanity often imagines itself as standing above nature, as controllers of destiny. But resets remind us that we are participants, not exceptions. We are subject to the same cycles as forests, oceans, and stars. Our footprints are fragile, our monuments temporary, and yet, like every species before us, we have the capacity to endure, to transform, to begin again if we must. We are fragile, but we are also resilient. That balance is what defines us. There is comfort in seeing resets as part of a larger story. The Earth has survived worse than anything we have yet imagined. The cosmos has endured destruction on scales beyond comprehension, and yet here we are, alive in this moment, breathing air made by ancient trees, standing on soil enriched by countless deaths and renewals, looking at stars born from the ashes of others. We are the children of resets, whether we realise it or not. Our very existence is proof that beginnings emerge from endings. So when we think about the next reset, whether human or cosmic, we can hold two truths at once. It may be devastating. It may erase much of what we know and love, but it will not erase everything. Something will endure. Life will find a way. Renewal will follow. That doesn't mean we should welcome catastrophe, but it does mean we can meet it with perspective, with humility, with awareness that even in collapse there is possibility. And then there is the quieter truth, the one that matters most in daily life. Every morning is a kind of reset. Every dawn wipes away the night before and offers something new. We may not notice it because it feels ordinary, but it is the same rhythm on a smaller scale. To live is to experience resets constantly, sleep to waking, silence to sound, despair to hope. These cycles are not only geological or cosmic, they are personal. They remind us that even when the world feels heavy, tomorrow can still bring a new light. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson. We cannot control resets, but we can choose how we meet them. We can cling to permanence and grieve when it fails, or we can embrace impermanence and find meaning in the fragile moments we are given. To know that everything passes is not to lose hope, but to see clearly. It is to understand that the beauty of existence lies not in its permanence but in its briefness, its fleeting light before the darkness returns and then dawn comes again. So when you look at the world and wonder if Earth has already been reset, when you think of Atlantis and lost civilizations, of floods and fires, of fossils and silences, of stars that explode and galaxies that collide, remember that all of it is part of the same rhythm. It is not a story of final endings, but of endless beginnings. We are one beginning among many, and whatever comes after us will be another. That does not make our time less important. It makes it infinitely valuable, and maybe in the end that is all we need to carry. That every reset is also a dawn. That every silence carries the possibility of a new story. That even in fragility life endures. And that here, now, in this brief moment before the next reset, we are alive to witness it, to tell it, to pass it forward in whatever way we can. That is enough.